Most people either overcomplicate their personal portfolios with huge frameworks and fancy libraries, or they keep postponing it because they don't think their skills are good enough yet. And that's a problem because your portfolio is often the first thing recruiters, clients, and hiring managers look at. Today, I'm going to show you how to build a beautiful, modern personal portfolio using just React and Tailwind CSS. No unnecessary bloat and no magic libraries you don't understand. We'll build everything from scratch. A stunning hero section, an about section, a place where you can display all your best projects, a beautiful experience timeline, a testimonials carousel, and a fully working contact section so that recruiters can reach out to you. But this isn't just an UI build. Along the way, you'll learn how to structure a real-world React app, style it cleanly with Tailwind, and bring it to life with pure CSS animations that feel smooth and professional. By the end of the video, you'll have a portfolio you can actually deploy, customize, and be proud to share, and a much stronger understanding of how React and Tailwind work together in real projects. Before we get into the video, if you could just leave a like and subscribe, I would massively appreciate it. And if you want to learn React more in depth, just go ahead and click the link in the description to check out my ReactJS Ultra course for beginners.
Okay everyone, to get started, what I want to do is I want to create a folder inside of my computer. I'm going to call it Dev Personal Portfolio. Then what I want to do is I want to copy, just drag and drop it inside of my code editor of choice. Now I'm using VS Code for this video. However, feel free to use any code editor that you want. Now we have to set up our React project. To do that, we're going to be using one of the most popular bundlers out there for React, which is Vite. Now, Vite is the standard way of creating your React apps in today's day and age. Back in the day, you would use something like Create React App, but I highly recommend that you use either Vite, or if you're building something like an Next.js app, you use the Create Next App command. Now for Vite, what we need to do is run npx create Vite, and then let's install the latest version of Vite. So I already have the latest version. It didn't ask me to install anything, but if you don't have it, it's going to ask you to install the create Vite command. Now we need to give a name to this project. However, this name that over here is just going to be the name of the folder in which the project is going to be created in. Now we are already inside of a folder that I created for this project, so I don't really want to create another folder and put the project there. So to bypass that and make the project just be built on the folder that we already made, I'm just going to give the name of dot so that it creates it inside of here. Then it asks us to create the framework. Now Vite isn't just for React. You can create projects with a bunch of different frameworks, but in our case we are choosing React, so I'll choose that option and press enter. We're building this in JavaScript, and we're only building this in JavaScript because I want to make it accessible for everyone, even if you don't know TypeScript. But if you are building a React project, I highly recommend that you eventually do learn TypeScript, and I do have a video for that as well. Now I'm going to choose use roll down Vite because it's an experimental feature that eventually is going to be default in all Vite projects. It's just supposed to make your projects run and build faster. I'm going to choose that, and then I'm going to choose yes to install npm and start now. This is going to create all the files and folders in our project, and it's going to install all the dependencies. Now the project is running, and I opened it up inside of my web browser with by going to the URL localhost 5173, which is the port where every Vite application runs in. So now let's get started. The first thing I want to do is I want to install the necessary dependencies that we're going to have in this project. So I'm going to open up another tab on my terminal, and I want to install first TailwindCSS. To do that, I'm going to run npm install, and then I'll install the base TailwindCSS package, but also I need to install the plugin for Vite. To do that, I'm going to install the package at TailwindCSS-/Vite. Perfect. Now, to set up TailwindCSS in your project, I'm going to come over here to our Vite config. And the first thing I want to do here is I want to import from the at TailwindCSS/Vite package. I want to import not from this curly braces, just like this, the TailwindCSS plugin. And I need to add it to the end here of the list and call it. If this isn't added, then your Tailwind project won't be configured with your Vite project won't be configured with Tailwind. Now, another thing I want to do is I want to change how we import packages. If you go into the project right here, you'll see that when you want to import something like a file or a logo like we're doing over here, you have to specify directly the path to that file, right? Here we're importing the React logo, which is just a SVG in the assets folder, and I have to directly put here the path towards that. Now instead, I want to actually set a default path where every time I put this on my import, where I do like this, import at, this takes me back to the root so that I can always just quickly access the root of all my imports. You'll see how useful that is. And to do that, we have to import path from path, and then in our define config over here, I need to set a resolve and then an alias, and we can set the alias to be the @ symbol, and we basically set the path to always resolve to the directory name at /src. I always do this in my React projects with Vite so that I can easily import it. If you're familiar with something like Next.js, this is how they do it by default. So now we can close this up and we can go to our app.css. I'm going to delete this file. We don't need this. We're going to do all of our CSS stuff on our index.css over here. Then I want to delete all of this as well. And I want to import at the top over here, TailwindCSS. This is a crucial line that you need to put. If you don't put this on your index.css file, none of your Tailwind will actually work. Because I also deleted my app.css, I want to come to the app.jsx and I want to delete that import over here, together with actually everything that we have. I'm going to delete and make this component be completely empty so that we have a clean slate to build our project. Now, to get started, I want to just set up a bit of how our Tailwind infrastructure is going to look like. And the first thing I want to do is I want to define some custom colors for our project. Now, what does that mean? Well, it means that throughout our project, we're going to have a bunch of different text, and those texts are going to have different colors. Not just text, but also different parts of it, like backgrounds, even like border radiuses that we want to maintain consistent and are not things that already come with Tailwind. Like the green color we're going to have for the text that you saw in the demo, that's not a custom, like that's not a default color in Tailwind. So we're going to have to create a color for ourselves. To define custom colors that you want to reuse, you just use the add theme at the top over here, and then define the colors by adding double hyphens, adding the word color, and then defining the name of the color. For example, the background of our website is going to have a very specific color, and we're going to be reusing this multiple times. It's going to be this hexadecimal over here. Now, every time we now use the color named background, and you'll see us doing this, it is going to use this color. Now, there's other ones that we want to do as well. For example, I want to define one for foreground. Now, what does foreground means? It means like, for example, the text that goes in front of the background should be white. So usually the foreground color is the opposite in the color spectrum from the background. And I applied this version of white over here. Now, there's a bunch of other colors we want to define. For example, we're going to have a bunch of cards in this project, and I defined this color for a card. Now, we are going to, I'm just going to copy and paste all of the remaining colors that we want to have in our project. And if you want to write one by one, you can just write them, or you can just copy it from the code in the description. This is all we have to do. We defined a bunch of colors, and also we defined a radius that we're going to be using multiple times in this project as well, just for whenever we want to apply a border radius. We'll just use this. Now, what I want to do is I want to come here and I want to define the base layer of our project. Now, this is just going to be some of the initial elements that are by default part of the website. For example, everywhere in the HTML part of the website, I want to set a scroll behavior to be smooth. This is because we're going to have a bunch of scrolling through the different pages when you navigate through the navbar, and I want to set that to be the scroll behavior. Also, I'm going to define the body. Now, we're not going to make a lot of CSS changes directly from here. Most of it is actually going to be part of Tailwind, right? However, some of the stuff like the background color of the entire website and the general color of text, I can just define it over here. We're also going to define some stuff like the font that we're going to be using for this project. To define the overall background color that we want to use, I'm going to set a background color, and I want to actually use the background color that we have over here. To do that, I can use a var function that allows me to copy the name of this variable that we created over here and put it inside of here. Now you see that the entire website changes that color. We're going to do the same thing for the text color and also for the font family. The text color, I set it to color foreground to make the text be white. And then for the font family, it's not a variable, it's just the font that we're going to be using in this website. Now, there are different parts of the website that uses a different font. There's a specific part where we want to use the Playfair display font. So I want to create a class called font serif because it's a serif font. And whenever I call this class, I'm going to be changing the text to use this font. I'll specify when we're doing this. Now, we're pretty much done with the basis of our CSS. And what I want to do is I want to come to our app.jsx and start defining the structure of the website. So to start things off, I want to change this to actually utilize a div. And on this div, I want to apply a couple base classes. The first thing is I want to apply a minimum height that is the height of the screen. So no matter which page we're in, at least the height of the layout is going to be the total height of whatever your screen size is. Then I want to apply an overflow in the X direction to be hidden. Then I want to define the structure of where we have the navbar at the top and all of the sequential sections. So to do that, I'll call here a component we haven't created called navbar. And below this, I want to have a main tag that will call all of the other components that represent the different sections. For the navbar, let's create that component. To do that, I'll create here a folder called layout. Now, why is that? Well, I'm going to have a couple components that are specific to the layout of the website, like the navbar, the footer, and so on. And I'll put them in this folder because they're specific for that. We're also going to have another folder called sections, which will represent the different sections in our project. Now, for the layout, I'll create here a navbar.jsx, and I'm going to export a constant called navbar, and I'm going to set it equal to a component function. Then I'll return a header tag, which for now should remain like that. Then I want to start by building the components and files for the different sections. Now, what are the different sections we're going to have? Well, the first one is going to be the hero section, right? It's the first thing that shows up in the page. So we're going to create this, and I'm going to copy what we have here for navbar, paste it here, and then just change the name of the component. Also, for all of the sections, this will pretty much be a section tag. We're going to use the very specific HTML tags to define each part so that we can keep everything organized. Then I'm going to duplicate this file and I'm going to create the next section. The next section is going to be the about section. So we'll create an about file, change this to about. We'll do the same thing now with the experience. So we'll change this to say experience. We'll copy again. We're going to create a projects section, and I'll change this to say projects. And then I'll copy again and I'll make the testimonials section. And I think that should be pretty much it. We just need one more actually. And I need to change the testimonials to say testimonials instead of project. So testimonials. And then on the testimonials copy, which is the copy we made, we're going to put the contact section and then just change this to say contact. Perfect. Now I'll close all of these files because we don't need them open anymore. But we have all of the components created and files created for the different sections. Now we are not adding anything inside of them, but at least we have them set up so we can just set up the structure. Now, what is this structure? Well, we're going to have at the top the navbar, and then inside of this main tag, we're going to have the different sections. First, it's going to be the hero section. Did we just call it hero? Let me make sure. Yeah, we just called it hero. Now to import this, I'm going to come over here at the top and I'm going to say import from. Then I'm going to use the @ symbol / and I'm going to go into the sections / hero. Now, because we set up the @ as the path, I'll be able to import the hero component from here. You see that if I come here and I were to write something, now if you come here to the hero section and I just write something, it should appear over here, but it doesn't. And that's actually because we are not importing the navbar, so it's giving us an error. But if I change that, you see that it does. And that's why we changed the @ symbol. So we don't have to, put a bunch of dots over here to move back to this specific path. The @ symbol represents starting off in the source folder. So I just go to the sections folder and then to this specific file. Perfect. Now I'm going to do the exact same thing for all of the other components. I'll just copy them, paste it over here, then change it. For example, the second one is going to be the about. The third one is going to be the projects and so on. And then I'll be back in a second. Perfect. As you can see, I just set up all of them and I imported all of the correct files. And now we're good to go. I want to start off by building the navbar. It's always what I start with because it helps set up the rest of the website. Now, to start things off, I want to set up the infrastructure inside of this navbar. We're going to have a nav section over here that is going to contain a logo on the left and also a button on the right. Now, this depends if we're in desktop mode or in mobile mode. So to start off, we're going to do it in desktop mode. So in desktop mode, we're going to have here the logo on the side and also all the links appearing in the middle. So we got to start off by doing the following. Inside of this nav tag, I'm going to put an A tag that is going to have the logo, which in my case is just going to be my initials, PM, and then I'm going to add a span that is going to have a dot. Now we're going to obviously add styling to them. It should look a bit like this. We're going to make it bigger, but for now, that's good enough. Then what I want to do is I want to set up the other side of this, which is the side where we're going to have all the different navigation links. So I'm going to create here a div and I'm going to add a comment above here because this is going to be the desktop nav. Then inside of this, we're going to have another div and we want to define a list at the top where it's going to contain all of the different links we want to use for navigation. Now, to do that, I'm going to create here the nav links list, and inside of it, it's going to be an object. That object will contain two things: an href, which is basically where do you want to take the user when they click on this link, and we're going to do one for each individual section. The first one is going to be to the about section, and then a label. The label is going to be used for just what it's displayed as a text on the navbar. So I'm just going to write about with a capital A. Then we want to do this for all the other links as well. We're going to have one for projects, one for experience, and one for testimonials. Then we get this list and we loop through it so that we can show each link. To do that, I'm going to grab here the nav links. I'm going to map it. And for each link, I'm going to render an A tag. And that A tag will allow it to be a link. And I'll put the link, the label inside of it. This will make it such that if I go here, it renders the label of each of the links. I know right now it's just like not separated at all, but it's an actual link that I can click. To make it actually be clickable, I have to put here the href, which is going to be the link.href. And you see that even though there's no sections, if I click on it, the URL changes because I'm navigating between the different sections. Perfect. Now, when you loop through lists in React, it's always important that you pass a key to the highest level component or element that you return. So I'm just going to get the index of each item, and I'll just use that as the key to help React process the list better. Now, I feel like it's time for us to add the styling for the navbar. We created the elements, but I think the styling comes next. So to start things off, in the header tag over here, I want to add a class name. And I want to make it fixed at the top because the navbar will scroll down with us so that you always have access to it. So to do that, I'm going to pass the position as fixed. Since I'm passing a position fixed, I need to set it to the top left. So I'll put a top of 0 and a left of 0. Then I want to make the background of the navbar be transparent. You'll see why later, but basically the navbar background will be transparent up until when you scroll down and then it becomes something else. It has like a glassy look to it. Then the next thing is I want to put a padding in the y direction of 5 because that should create a lot more space to actually form the navbar. Then on our nav over here, I'm going to add a bunch of classes that are going to help define the actual navigation. So to start off, I'll make this a container and set the margin in the X direction to be auto. Also, I'll put a padding X to be 6 and I'll set the display to be flex, which will allow me to center the items as you can see. Now, I want to justify them in between, which will basically, actually, let me remove this heroes section that I realize now that that text is ruining what we have for the navbar. Yeah, now it looks like a navbar. I want to put a justify between because then it will make it such that this is absolutely on the left and this is absolutely on the right. To do that, I'm going to come here to our navbar and I'll set justify between, and you see that now it should have a separation, but it doesn't because it doesn't know where this navbar should end. So to do that, I'm going to add also a right 0 to say that it ends at the right, the absolute right. And you see that now the logo appears on the left and the links appear on the right. Perfect. Now on our A tag over here, which is the logo, we're just gonna set an href to be this, which basically will just take you to the top of the page. And then I want to add a class name here that will make the logo have a size of XL, the font to be bold, the tracking to be light. Now, obviously, text to be XL and the font to be bold, you understand what it is. It just makes the text a lot bigger and the font will be bolder. But tracking light is related to letter spacing. So by setting it to light, we're pretty much, so tracking light, actually, this should be tracking tight, sorry. Tracking tight is related to the letter spacing of the text. So by setting it to tight is as if you were setting a letter spacing to be something like -0.5 or -0.02 or something like that of EM in letter spacing. So it will make the text be a little bit more put together. Then I want to set the text to actually not have, then the text right now is white because we set all of the text to be of color foreground, right? However, I have this primary color over here, right? And this is the green color that we're using throughout the website. So what I want to make it is that when you hover over the logo, is going to make the color of the text be that primary color. To do that, I just set it to text primary. And now all of a sudden, if I hover this, it will become the greenish color. Then also the dot that we have here, the reason why we put a pen in between the dot and the initials is just so we can make that always be green. So I'll do text primary and it will have this green color already by default. Now let's go to the desktop navigation. In here, I want to set the following. I want to set the items to be center and for them to have a gap of 1. And then I'll put here a display of flex. Now, the next thing I want to do is I want to come to the div inside of this and I want to set the class name to be glass. Now, what is glass? Glass is a class that we haven't created yet. It's actually going to be the background of this Navbar system and we're going to reuse it multiple times in this project. To create a Tailwind class that we want to reuse, but it's not just like something small, like a color, it's something a little bit more elaborate. We have to utilize another type of layer. This is going to be the layer of components. These are Tailwind CSS components that we can reuse in our project, which are basically just normal CSS classes, but that we can call in our class name. So I'll create the glass class, and what I want to apply to it is I want to apply the following. First, we're setting a background color to be a mix of the color between the color surface, which is what we have over here for surface. It's this black color over here, and transparent. Also, we're adding a backdrop filter, which is going to add a blur of 16 pixels. You can play around with the blur if you think it doesn't look like the glassy effect that I want it to be. Then we're going to add a border here, which should use the color border that we also defined at the top. And just like that, this should have this glassy look. Now, because we haven't added more styles to this, it doesn't really look like anything, but you'll see in a second how good this actually looks. So to get that to look better, we're going to add here a rounded full, which should add a border radius to this navbar. Then I want to add here a padding in the X direction of 2 and a padding in the Y direction of 1. Also a display flex. I'll center the items and I'll put a gap of 1 in between each of the items. Now you can see it a lot better. Then what I want to do is I want to come inside of this A tag over here. And for each tag, let's add a bunch of class names. I'll make each individual link have a padding in the X direction of 4, so they have more space, and a padding in the Y direction of 2. I'll make the text be small, and the color of it is actually going to be using this other color that we defined called muted foreground. It's basically the color of our foreground color, but a bit muted. So the foreground color is white, the muted version is like grayish. So we'll do this, we're going to say muted foreground, then we're going to add it such that when you hover it, it then becomes the foreground color, which is white. I'm going to make it such that each of the links will be rounded full. And you'll see that now they look a lot better, right? As you hover them, it is gray and then it becomes white. But I also want to make a specific background to each of the links as well, especially when you hover it. So when you hover the section, each link, I want to add a BG, which is going to have the color equal to surface. It's this color over here. So to do that, I'm going to set here bg surface. And as you can see now, when I hover this, it creates this really cool effect. Now we want to add the call to action button. That call to action button is going to exist below this desktop nav. And I'm going to write over here CTA button. And it's going to be a button that leads you to the contact section. So I'm going to add a div over here, which is going to call this component, which we haven't created yet, called the button. Now, why are we making a component for button? Well, we're going to have multiple buttons in this project, and it's going to be super useful for us to just have one component that we can reuse, and it specifies all the classes and styles that we want for what a button should look like. To do that, I'm going to come here and I'm going to create here a folder called components. Now, in the components, we're going to create any shared components that we're going to have in this project. For example, the button.jsx. Now, in this button component, we're going to export a constant called button, and this component is going to have a lot of variety to it. So it's going to require us to pass in some props. For example, if you want to customize anything else on the button, you can just pass in a string, which is the class name, and all of the styles that you pass as the class name prop will be added to our style. Also, there's going to be this size prop that we can pass. There's going to be 3 sizes we want to specify that you can use for the different buttons, and we can reuse it throughout our project. Then we're going to accept children, and that's just because when we call this component, we want to allow the caller, which is just ourselves in different components, to specify the label inside of it. Now I'm going to return a UI that is going to be a normal button, but it's going to have a lot of specifications to it. For example, it's going to have a span inside of it with the children. Now, if I come here to the Navbar and I import that button over here, so import button from the at components/button, then I can just put here the contact me label, and we should see that button appearing with the correct label. But let's add the rest of the styles. First things first, this span over here, it's going to have a default class to all of it, which is going to say the position is going to be relative. Then we're going to set a display of flex. We're going to center the label, so item center. We're going to justify it as well to the center, and we're going to set a gap of 2. Then what I want to do is I want to define some base classes. So I'm going to pass here a variable called base classes, set it equal to a string that is going to represent the base classes for what a button should look like in our project without the need of or caring about the different sizes and so on. So to start things off, we're going to set a position to be relative for the button. We're going to set overflow to be hidden. We're going to set a rounded full as the border radius. And I'll also just open this up a bit so you guys can see slightly the button as we write. Obviously, throughout the rest of the tutorial, when we have the mobile part being done, I'm going to show the UI as I write the code. But just for now, since we're making the desktop part, it doesn't make sense to do that. So I'll hide the browser with my code editor. Then I want to actually, let me just apply these classes. These are the base classes, but we're going to make some changes to the final classes based on it. Right now, we're just going to apply the base classes to that. And I'll just pass the class name and then insert those classes in here. Now, what I also want to do? Well, I want to set the font to be medium, so it's a little bit more bold. And then I want to set the focus of this button, which right now it's barely a button. You can barely click on it and so on, but it will be fine. Then I want to add here the focus. I want to change some stuff out of when you focus on the button, like removing the outline when you focus on it. I also want to add a ring when it is visible. So when I focus on the button and it's visible, I'm going to add a ring, which is of size 2. A ring is just kind of like a border that goes around inputs. Then I'm going to set the same kind of style, but I'm going to change the color of that ring when it's focused. The color is going to be primary. It's the green color. Then I'm going to set a background color, is also going to be the green color. And I'll just put the text color to be the primary foreground color. So it's the color that we should use in front of the primary color, which is green. Then finally, when we hover this, I want to set the background to be the same primary color we have right now, but I want it to be 90% opacity. By adding the division symbol over here in Tailwind, it removes the opacity slightly. I don't know if you can see as I hover that. Then the last thing I want to do is I want to set a shadow that is large and also a color of that shadow to be the primary color, but that's too big, so I'm going to make it 25% opacity. Perfect. Now we're almost there. But you might be wondering, why is it all cluttered up, right? Why is the button so small? That's because here's what we need to do with the size, right? So when we define this variable here, base classes, this applies to every button no matter which size we choose. But in the classes over here, we're gonna actually use some string templating to apply the base classes. But depending on what size we define, we're going to apply different class names. So we have to define here the different size class correlation. It's going to be an object, and depending on which size you define that you want for the button, we're going to apply different styles. For example, if you want the button to be small, you're going to pass SM as the size on the prop over here. And if that's the case, then I want to apply the following sizes. I want to say the padding X will be 4, the padding Y will be 2, but the text is going to be small. Now in the medium, it's going to be, or I'm going to say default actually. We're going to set it to be padding X of 6, padding Y of 3, and the text will be base, which is just the base size. Finally, if I want the button to be large, then I'm going to set the padding X to be 8, the padding Y to be 4, and the text to be large. Now I can just grab the corresponding class by getting this size classes, applying it over here, just like this, getting the individual class or the individual class names based on the size prop and applying it. Now, if I do this, nothing happens because we never passed anything for this. Now, size can be null if we don't pass it, right? I'm calling here and I'm not passing anything for that prop. So I actually want to default it to the default size in case you don't pass anything, and you'll see that it becomes a lot bigger by default. Now we actually do want to pass something, and I actually want to make it small, not default. So I'm going to pass here the size prop, and I'm going to pass it to be small. So it's a lot smaller. Then I'll come here to the button, and there's just one more thing I want to do. If I ever want to specify any extra class names, I'll just insert them directly over here. Other than that, we are good to go. I'll also put here as an empty string just so that it defaults to an empty string. Now let's close this up and go back to our navbar. Now we're pretty much done with how the navbar should look like in desktop. However, it doesn't look good if we go into mobile. Let me scroll this like this. You see everything gets cluttered up and it looks horrible. So I think it's time for us to work on that. So to do that, I actually want to hide all of this, right? The desktop navigation and even this button if I am in a small screen. To do that, it's actually pretty simple. What I have to do is when I go here to the desktop navigation, you see how we set the display to flex? To hide this section, I can just set the display to hidden. But then it would hide it as well if I make this a lot bigger. And we don't want that. So actually, I can specify that I only want it to be hidden in small screens. But when the screen is a medium-sized screen and above, then I want to set it to be display flex again. You see that in a small screen or anything below medium, it doesn't show, but as I scroll up, it appears again. That's how you do some responsive design using TailwindCSS. We'll do the same thing with other parts of this. For example, with this contact button over here, we actually don't want it to appear if it is a small screen. So I'm going to set it to be display hidden. And if it's a medium screen and above, I'm not even going to use display flags. I'm going to use display block just because it makes more sense in this case. Then we want to create the mobile menu button. But in this case, we want to do it a bit different because we want to make it only appear if the user is in a small screen, not if it's in the big screen like we were doing before. So to do that, I'm going to create a button, and this one we're not going to be reusing the same class name just because this button is very specific. It's a mobile navigation button. And in here, in the class name, I want to make it such that it is hidden in a medium screen and above, but it's a normal display flex or display block if it's not a medium screen and above. Also, we're going to add a padding overall, not just in an X or Y direction, of 2, and I'll set the text to be the foreground color. Then I want to make the label of this to be an icon. Which icon? Well, it's a hamburger menu icon. But to use icons, I need to install another package. We're going to be using an icon library, which you might already know because it's one of the most famous one out there. It's Lucid React. I'm gonna install Lucid React and I'm gonna come back over here and I'm just gonna call the menu component. The menu component is a component from Lucid that just renders the icon for the menu, which is the one that we want for the mobile menu. We can also specify a size over here, and I'll set the size to be 24, which is pretty much the same as it is already. Now it's time for us to build the actual mobile menu. So to do that, I'm gonna create another section over here, call it mobile menu. And in here, we're gonna add a div. And remember, since this is only in mobile, we need to do the same logic we did over there, where in a medium screen and above, I wanna hide it. But other than that, I want to actually have it be a real section. Now, I wanna use the glass class for this. However, I want to make it a bit different. We have here the glass class. I want to have a version of this that is slightly stronger. That means 80% for the color mix, 80% for the border, and also the blur. I don't want it to be 16. I want it to be 24. It's just a slightly stronger version of this. So I'll just copy and paste here this other class. It's the same thing, but you saw that we changed a bit of the items. And I'm going to use it as the type over here, glass strong. Then inside of this div, I want to add another div. This one is just going to contain the same stuff that we pretty much had over here. So I'm going to copy this and I'll just paste it inside of here. It's just going to render the individual links, but it's definitely going to be different. Why? Because in that case, in the normal desktop menu, everything was appearing one right next to the other. But in mobile, they should appear vertically. So to start things off, I want to come over here, set this to be a container, a margin X to be auto, a padding X to be 6, and then a padding Y to be 6 as well. Finally, I want to display to be flex, but then the direction is going to be column, so they stack on top of each other. Then I also want to put a gap of 4, which is space them out just slightly. And then inside of here, I want to make some changes to the actual links. Now, what do I want to do? Well, they're completely different in mobile. So I will remove most of that. And I want to make it such that the text is actually larger in mobile, so it's easier to see. The color is still going to be muted foreground, which is what we had before. And we're going to have that thing where when you hover it, it becomes foreground. Hovering in mobile is kind of useless in my opinion, even though you still have to do it because who hovers over things in mobile? But we'll do that. And then I'll put a padding Y of 2. Perfect. Then we also want to have the contact me button like we had before. I'll just copy this and I'll put it directly below this. We don't have to do that check. And it pretty much is exactly how I want it to look. Now you can make it bigger if you want to, since it is in mobile. I'll even make it bigger. Actually, I think I like it this way. No, let's make it the medium one. That's fine. And now here is where you might be wondering, okay, that's fine. But how do I make it only appear when I click on this button? Because right now it's appearing no matter what. And that's a good question. Now to do that, we need to keep track of whether or not the user has clicked on this button. And that requires us to have a state. And I'll do that by creating one over here. We're going to create a state called is mobile menu open, and set is mobile menu open is going to be a use state, which is a Boolean that starts off as false. Now, we only want to show this mobile menu if the is mobile menu open is true. So I'll wrap this entire thing around with this conditional, and I'll put a double ampersand to represent that I'm only showing this if this condition is true. Now, how do we make this condition become true? Well, on the mobile menu button, we're going to add an on click to it, and we're going to basically call the set is mobile menu open, and we're going to set that value to be the opposite of what it is right now, so that it's kind of like a toggle. I click on it, it becomes false, or it becomes true because initially it's false, and then if I click on it again, it becomes false again. So it just switches its values. So to do that, I need to get what the current value is. I can access it in this callback function and set it to be the opposite of that. Now, when I click on this, it opens. When I click on it again, it closes. I can keep clicking it if I want to, but the icon here should actually change also if I click on it, because if not, then it looks a bit weird, right? Because it shows it as a menu. Actually, what I want to do is if the is mobile menu is already open, then I want to show a different icon, the X icon. If it's false, then I want to show the menu icon. I'll also set the size to be 24 to maintain consistency. Now you see that when I hover this and I click on it, it should work, but it actually breaks the website. Let's check to see why. Oh, it seems like we didn't import X from Lucid React. I apologize for that. Let me do that again. And yeah, you see that now it switches. It's basically just an X. If you want to just use X, you can do that too, but I prefer using the icon. I also want to make it such that when I hover it, it actually changes the cursor to be pointer. So I'll do that. And you see that it does do that. Perfect. Now you see that when I show this, it doesn't have a smooth animation like you might have seen in my demo. Actually, we wanted to animate like a fade in animation as you press on this. And there's different ways to do animations in Tailwind or in CSS in general. However, we're going to be using normal CSS animations for this project. So for all the animations we're going to have in this project, I'm going to come here to our index.css, and in here I want to create a layer which is going to be the utilities layer. This layer is going to be used for all of the utility classes, like for example animations. Then I'll define an animation. The first one we're going to have is a fade in animation, which it just fades some element into the page. Now to do that, we need to set an animation. Now an animation requires us to put a couple things. The first thing is, what is the actual animation name or the animation that you want to create? So we're going to create a fade in animation. I'm going to call it fade in, and we'll create it up here. To create an animation, we'll set keyframes, give it a name, fade in, and we have to basically specify the initial condition of this animation and the end condition. The initial condition will be defined by a from, and the end condition will be defined by a to. So it goes from this state to this state. Now initially, to fade in, you want to have the item have an opacity of 0, and then when it's over, that opacity will be 1, so it becomes fully visible. Also, you kind of want to, it's fading in, so it kind of moves slightly, right? It starts at a position slightly above what it should be at the end. So I'll set a transform over here and use the translate Y function and basically translate Y that item 20 pixels above. Then I'll set it back to 0 when it's done. And finally, I want to add a slight blur when it starts, and I'll set that to 10 pixels, and then I'll remove that blur when it's over. So set it to 0. Now, just like this, we can come here and add this animate fade in class. Now, absolutely nothing happens, as you can see. Why? Because we basically didn't define how long and how this animation should play out. So to do that, we're going to set the duration to be 0.8 seconds. So it takes just a slight amount of time to animate in, as you can see. And also I want to set in the ease out and both. What you'll see is that now when I refresh this, it has a way smoother animation into the page. Perfect. That's the first animation we're going to create. And we're going to create a lot of other animations. Now, from now on, since I already went into detail about how to create this animation, whenever we have an animation that we want to create, I'll copy and paste them into the utilities layer, and I'll just talk about them. I won't show myself writing so that I don't waste our times. Now, we're pretty much done with our navbar, and we can get started on our first section. Okay, everyone. To start things off on the hero section, we're going to start by defining some of the most basic classes that we're going to apply to every single section. So for the hero section, it's actually a bit different because the hero section should be the first thing you see, and it's going to fill up the entire screen, and then you're going to be able to scroll down. So I'm going to set a position to be relative, a minimum height to be of the screen size, then a display flex, an items center, and an overflow hidden. Then inside of this section, we're going to first set the background. The background is going to be the background image to this section. So I'm going to set a div and I'm going to put an image inside of it. Now you can use the same image I use on my project by downloading all of the assets in the description. In fact, if I already added all of those assets into this project, it's going to be on the public folder. So if you go to your public folder, as you can see over here, I added a bunch of stuff over here. The first thing is I added this image called the hero BG, which is just the background image we're going to put in the hero section. I also added a profile photo. This is clearly AI generated. I literally, I got it from like either the internet or I generated with ChatGPT, but you can put your own picture, of course. It's the photo that's going to show up over here. Then for projects, these are photos of actual projects that I've made videos on. So here's where you're going to add the photos for the projects that you have built and you want to showcase. So you can add as many as you want. I'll show you guys how to add more projects later, but I'm just adding the photos initially just so we have that ready. But most importantly, we want to use this hero BG image that I have over here. So to use that, what I want to do is on this image, I want to set the source to be equal to /herobg.jpg, because if I access, if I put images and assets on the public folder, you can access it directly without having to put the specific pathway. Now you see it shows up over there, but obviously there's so much more we want to change. I'm going to add an alt over here, which just says hero image, but you can add something more specific for accessibility. Then I'll add a class name. The class name is, I want to make the width be the full width of the screen, the height to be the full width, and then I want to set the object to be covered and the opacity to be 40. Now the object cover doesn't really do anything yet, but the opacity, you see it blends in a little bit better. Now what I want to do is I want to set this div to have a class name of position absolute. So it should be position absolute and then have an inset to be 0. So it actually blends in really nice. Then below this, I want to add a div that is actually going to be a self-closing div. This div will have a position of absolute, another inset of 0, and I'm going to set a gradient to be accompanying this image. It's going to be a gradient, and to build a gradient to the background, you set the BG to have a gradient, and you say to B. When you say to B, it basically starts at the top and then it goes to the bottom. So that's what it does. If you wanted to do it to the right, you could do to right. Now, I want to make it to B, so to the bottom, and I want to take it from the color background, but background with only 20% opacity because I thought that was a bit too strong, to eventually get to the background at the bottom. You see, it now has this gradient. However, I also want to add a color in between. So to add a color in between the two, so it's a gradient with 3 colors, you add a via in the middle and you add whatever color you want to do. I'm going to make it such that it goes from 20 to 80% opacity to full opacity. So I'll make it here in the middle. It will be 80% opacity. So this is the background image with the gradient around it. Then here's where it becomes a bit cool. I want to make some really interesting green dots that just like float around the screen. You've probably seen this so many times on websites. I think it's really cool. I've added it multiple times in my projects. And even if you don't want to add it, I think it's a good work experience. Like you'll understand how to do this and maybe use that for other projects. What we want to do is we want to create a div. And in this div, we want to actually loop through an array of 30 items. 30 items because we want to have 30 dots, but you can choose the different value for it. To do that, it's a nifty hack here. You create an array by using the array function and you define the length. I'm defining it to be 30. It'll create an array of 30 items that are pretty much empty. It's nothing, you don't need to care about what goes inside of it. What you need to care is that it's going to loop through them 30 times. Now for each item that it loops, we want to get the index of that item. And then we want to render a div. And on this div, we're going to render a green dot that represents it. So I'll start with the class name. I'm going to set it to be absolute. The width of the dot is going to be 1.5 and the height is going to be 1.5. Then because it's a dot, it should be fully rounded to make it into a circle. And then the opacity, I'm going to set it to be 60. Now you're not seeing anything on the screen, right? But that's because to make this work, it would be better if we didn't actually use Tailwind. We applied most of the styles directly through CSS using the style object over here. For example, I want to apply the background color and I want to make it be this green color over here. It's pretty much you see all of them now are appearing, but they're all appearing one on top of each other. So it's 30 dots appearing over here. Then I want to actually define where they appear in the screen. So because the position is absolute, I'm going to have to define a left and a top, but I want them to be random. So I want to make it such that the left positioning, it's going to be a random position. And I'll do this by adding a variable over here, math.random, using the random function. And I want it to be one value between 0 and 100. To do that, I just multiply this times 100. Now, why 100? Because 100% of the screen or 100% of the horizontal width. So this is a percentage. So that's why I made it into a template string so I can put the percentage sign in the end. Now I'll copy this and do the exact same thing at the top. And you see that they randomly appear. As I refresh this, they'll always appear at random places. Now, we do want to make them animate where they move because this looks really ugly if you want to do it this way. And also I want to add some class names here to make just the overall thing look better. I want to make this be absolute, set the inset to be 0 and the overflow to be hidden. And I want to remove any pointer events. That's just to make sure nothing funky happens. Then I also want to make sure, if you notice, when we added this thing that covers everything, right? It kind of appears above the navbar. So I need to change some things on the navbar to make that work. For example, I want to make the navbar appear on top of that gradient. So I'll set the Z index to be 50. So now it actually appears. Just that. Now we'll come back here and we'll apply the animation. Now, how do we apply that animation? Well, we need to create that animation. So I'm going to come here into our index.css and I'll create it. Now remember, I already told you I'm not going to show myself creating every animation, so I'm just going to paste this animation first. I'll start with the keyframe. The animation is going to be called slow drift. It's going to have actually a good amount of stages. On this one, we just had 2 stages. It starts at a point and then it ends at another. So that's why we use the from and to. But when you want to actually have very specific instructions, right? It goes from 0% to 25. So there's 4 steps in the way. You can add percentages instead. So it starts and ends at 0, meaning all of the dots will always start and end at the position they were assigned when we use the math.random over here. But then at 25, it will translate to the left 20 and also negative 30, and then it will move another set of positioning on the 50% and then again on the 75%. Now, because we're using this animation on our style class over here, we don't have to create any Tailwind classes in here. We can just do it directly here. So I'll just do that. I'll set the animation to be equal to slow drift. Now you see nothing happens until we add a certain length to that animation. We could, for example, add here 1 second and you'll see that we could, for example, add here, 50 seconds, and you'll see that they will start moving. However, they're all moving in the same direction and they're all moving at the same time. That's why, because we also want to randomize how long it takes for the animation to happen. So what I do is I'm going to add 15 plus math.random and make it be a random value between 0 and 20, and then apply that to seconds. So they're all moving at actual different rates. Then I want to add the is_in_out property and make it infinite so that when it ends, it actually restarts the animation. Now, it actually looks like they're moving on their own. Now, I also want to put an animation delay just so that they don't all start at the same time, because if we do that, then there is a chance that they actually all start moving in the same direction just by chance, right? But with an animation delay, we can actually make it such that some of them are going to start at a different start time than others. So I'm going to set math.random and I want to make them start at an interval of 0 to 5 seconds. So you see some of them takes 5 seconds to start, some don't take any time. Perfect. Now we have our dots created. Now it's time for us to create the content of the hero section. So I'll create here content and then I'll define here the div for this section. We'll start by adding another div inside of it and we'll separate our hero section between a left column, which is basically going to be the text content of this hero section, and we're going to have the right column, which is going to be the profile image. Now for the left section, we're going to add a div and we're going to add a little badge. Now this badge is going to be for the name of the section. So I'll show you how it will turn out at the end. So this is the final result, right? This is how it's going to look in the end. You see that this is the badge I'm talking about. Now in mobile mode, it doesn't matter. They don't have this left and right column, but we're going to start building for desktop at the same time. So we'll structure it this way. And we want to start by building that badge. To do that, I'm going to add a span over here that is going to show what your position is or what you work as. So I'm going to put software engineer, but you can put whatever you want. And I'll put that I am a React specialist, but you can put whatever specialization you want to choose. Now, what I want to do is I want to just apply the styles. So I'll start off by adding a style here to this span. I'm going to make it such that it has a width of 2, a height of 2, a BG that is going to be primary, and it's going to be rounded full. So it's that green rounded pill, right? But it's behind our gradient, so we'll have to address that. Then I want to make it such that this div is going to have the animate fade in. Most of our elements from now on are going to have an animate fade in, which is that animation we created for the navbar, just because we want them to appear immediately when the user appears in the section. We also want to wrap this span with another span just so we can apply some styles. Now, if you're confused why sometimes I add divs, sometimes I add spans, it's just because spans literally has no inherent styles to it. So it's good for us to, if we want to apply styles without having any other side effects to it. Now, in this span, I'm going to add a class name, where the display is going to be inline flex. The items are going to be centered, and then I'm going to set the gap between the two items, a gap of 2, and then a padding x of 4 and a padding y of 2. Then I want to set the rounded to be full. I want the background to be glass, and then I want to set the text to be small and the text to be primary. Now you might be wondering why we screwed it up, right? Because it looked already good before. But here's what we have to do. We have to remove this and then make it such that this is self-closing. And now this will be part of this. Then on this div, I want to set the class to have a space in the y direction of 8. That's because this is the left column, and in between the text and all of the sections here, there's going to be a gap of 8 in between each item on the y direction. Then, just to set this up finally, I'm going to set the class names for this outer div here. I'm going to set it to be a container, margin x to be auto, padding x to be 6, padding top to be 32, padding bottom to be 20, position to be relative, and a z index to be 10. Then on this div, I'm going to set this to be a grid. However, only if you are not in a very large screen. If you are in a very large screen, then I want to set the specific amount of columns to be 2, because when you expand this and you get to a large screen, it becomes 2 columns in this section. But in normal ones, it becomes 1 column, right? So that it actually stacks one on top of the other. I'm also going to put a gap of 12 in between each item. Now, we won't see any change in that just because we only have 1 item right now, but I'll also center everything. Now we're almost done. The only thing I want to do is, if you notice, this has a little pulsing animation, as you can see, and I want to add that as well. To do that, I'm going to add an animate pulse over here to this span. Now, do we have to make that animation? No, that's actually an animation that comes already with TailwindCSS, so we don't have to worry about making it ourselves. Now, we'll come down below this div, and we're going to add the headline for the hero section. So we'll create a div and we'll add an h1 text that will say something in the lines of this. So I added here, I just copy and pasted just because whatever you write is going to be very different from what I write. But it came with already some styles that I'll just explain what it is. So right off the bat, just put something like, for example, that is catchy, right? It's got what's going to appear at the top of your page. In our case, we want to put this: crafting digital experiences with precision. But here's the kicker. We want to make it such that it is very interactive, very, you can look at it and be like, okay, they put some time into it. So we made it such that there's a clear change in the pattern of the text. The big part of the text is just a normal white text, but then the digital part over here is going to be green, which is the primary color. And then this last part, precision, is going to be a different font. That's why we created the font serif class in the beginning. It applies a different font, and also we made it italic by setting the italic class. Now, we also want to make it font normal and text white, and I wanted to do this as well. Set the color of the digital to be text primary, and then there's this class that we don't have right now. It's going to be called glow text, and it's going to make a text have a little glow. So how do we make that class? Well, we'll come here to their index.css, and similar to how we did with the glass and the glass strong, this is going to be a class that is a component. We're going to create a class called glow text, and all it does is it sets a text shadow, and it uses our color primary together with the transparent color to make a subtle shadow around the text. Now we can continue moving forward. The next thing we want to do is add a paragraph tag that should appear right below it. It's a little bit description of what you are, like who you are, right? So I added this paragraph tag as well because it's going to be different for you guys. And it came with a little bit of some class names, like a text large to make it bigger, a text muted foreground to change the color to gray, and I made the whole section be a little bit bigger. Now, I put this, it's clearly AI generated. Obviously I'm not gonna write the copy for this. I just asked ChatGPT to generate a description of myself, but you can put whatever you want and make sure that it doesn't sound like corny, I mean, I think mine already sounds a bit corny, but make it personal, but also make it make sense to who you are as a developer. Now here's the kicker. Because we applied the animate fade in, you'll see that this top over here fades in, right? But the way we want it to happen is actually like this. There's a delay between the different sections of the hero section and how they fade in. This fades in first, this fades in second, and then this fades in after. You'll see that when I refresh the final product, this is exactly what happens. So here's what we have to do. We have to set a animate fade in to one of the sections over here. We're going to add more stuff to this, but for now, let's just focus on this. I'm going to add an animate fade in here. Now, we don't want it to happen at the same time, right? Then I'll come here to this div. I'm just going to put a space of y of 4 so that there's a gap between this text and this one. And then let me come to this h1 tag and let me just set a class name here. I'm going to make it 5XL. So it's a way bigger. Then I want to make it be on a medium screen and above. I'm going to make it even bigger, 6XL. And a large screen, I'm going to make it be 7XL. Then I'll make the font be bold. I'll change the leading. Remember, we made it tight. And then I'm going to add the animate fade in. But here's the kicker. We want to make it such that they don't appear at the same time. This appears first, this second, and then this third. To do that, we're going to create a bunch of animation delay classes. So down here in our utility layer, we're going to create a animation delay for each amount of delay we want to set. So I already created here. It's very repetitive. And what this looks like is like this. If I want to apply a delay of 100 milliseconds to an animation, now there's an animation delay class dash 100. Same thing with 200, 300, 400, 500. And what does this mean? It means that if I want to make it such that, for example, this appears first, then this, then I go to I don't put a delay on the first part, but then on the second one, which is this one over here, I set the animation delay to be 100, right? Because then now this appears first and this. Now it's not that clear because 100 milliseconds is not that much, but let's make this one have, I don't know, 800 just for now, just for us to see how obnoxious that is. So let me refresh this and oh, that didn't even do anything. There's definitely something wrong. Oh yeah, I wrote this wrong. Should be animation delay. Let's refresh this and yeah, it takes 800 milliseconds for this animation to be done. Now to be subtle, we're going to make this be 200. Now this comes first, 100 milliseconds later this comes, and then 200 milliseconds later this comes. And now it looks a lot better. Perfect. Now we can come back here and we can continue building. Now the first thing is I want to add a call to action section right below the text. So I'm going to put here CTAs. Now there's going to be two call to actions. So they're both going to be buttons. One of them is going to be a button that has a size over here of large. So we're reusing that button class we have. And then did that not import that class? Yeah, it didn't. So it broke our website. So let me import button from @ and then we do components / button. Now that appears. We need to put a label inside of it. I'm going to say contact me. Then I want to make it such that it also has a little arrow next to it. So I'm going to use the arrow right class from Lucid. It will be an icon. And I want to make it such that the class has a size of 5. So I'll put here size of 5. Actually, that's way too small. I didn't want to put a size. I'll use a class name where the width is 5 and the height is 5. That looks a lot better. Then I want to add another button. However, this button will have a little bit of a different aspect to it. This button should look like this, just a normal button, but this one has this really cool border animation. So I want to create a button which is going to do that. Now to do that, we're going to actually render a normal button because we don't want to apply that other styles that we have. And we want to add an SVG inside of it. Now, I'm not going to show myself writing the SVG just because this is not an SVG tutorial, but this SVG is going to be the animated SVG that we have around this button. Now, to actually get it to work, we're also going to put a text in here. So I'm going to add a span, and this span is going to put whatever you want to add as the secondary button on this call to action. For my website, I'm going to make it be a download CV because you want to make it very like apparent that where you need to download the resume, right? You don't want to make it such that they take forever to find that. Now, I also want to import the download icon from Lucid. I can just import up here from Lucid download, and then what I want to do is apply some styles. I'll start with the button over here. I want to make it such that the class name, and I actually want to put a good amount of classes here. So to not clutter this entire page, I'm going to create a different component over here. I'm going to call it animated border button.jsx. And in here, we're going to export const animated border button, and we're going to just paste whatever we have from here. Copy this and then paste it here. Then we're just going to call that animated border button, and in here we now have to re-import this download icon from Lucid. Perfect. And I'm just going to copy and paste the direct class names for this button because it's a lot of it and it's a lot related to how we want this button to look based on the SVG. But pretty much this is what we want. Now there's a bit more that we need to do. For example, this last class over here, all of this is just pretty much what we talked about on the first button when we were creating. So I don't want to just talk about it again, but this animated border here, this is not a Tailwind class. We have to make this. Now, where do we make this? Well, when I hover this, I want to add the animation. So I need to go to the layers of utility, exactly where we are around here, and I'm going to create this class. Now the class should be animated border and it should have the following properties, but more specifically only if it's a hover. As you can see, it should make the whole thing be kind of fading in as a glass and green by mixing up the background color and the backdrop filter. But still, it's not animating the whole thing. And that's because we created this class over here inside of the SVG. The path that goes around the border, we created this download CV path. Now I'm actually going to call it something else. I'm going to call it animated border path. Why? Just because we're going to reuse this button in another case that isn't the download CV button. So I don't want to call it the same thing. Now what I want to do is above this, I want to set a group hover and then set the animated border path, and I'll set an animation in here. Now what animation do we want to make? Well, it's going to be an animation that is related to the that makes the actual SVG move around the border. You're going to call it animated border, and it uses the stroke dash offset as a property to make that happen. Now we have to apply that animation. So I'm just going to copy this, apply it over here, and you see absolutely nothing happens as of right now. However, I'm going to put here a duration of 1.5 seconds. I'm going to make it linear and infinite so that it keeps rolling around. And you see that now it does work. But hear me out. I know it looks very ugly. So we're going to fix that. To fix that, there's a couple more things that we need to do. To start things off, I'm going to come here to this pen and I'm going to add a class name of relative, then a Z of 10. And I want to make the display be flex, then items center, justify center, and a gap of 2. Then on this download, I just want to make it a little bit smaller, make it exactly the same size as the other icon with a width of 5 and a height of 5. Now it looks a lot better. Now I want to put a space in between them. And to do that, I'm going to come here to our hero section. And on this div, I'm going to put a display flex, a flex wrap, and a gap of 4. The gap is what sets the width in between them. I also want to animate this fade in and set a delay of 300. So I'll say animation delay 300. And now this should appear after the top as well. Now we want to add another section over here, which is going to be for the social links. So I'm going to say social links. It's going to be any links to your social medias. Now, sometimes you don't want to do this. Sometimes you want. Feel free to put your social media if you want to. Now I'll say span over here and I'll put follow as in like follow me at, and then after the span, I'm going to actually create an object, not an object, an array of objects with each of the social links. Now the first one is going to have an icon, and it's going to be my GitHub account. I'll use the GitHub icon from Lucid, and I'll use the href over here, which is just going to take you to, I'll just put this because I'm not going to link my actual GitHub, but put your actual GitHub account over here. Don't put a hashtag, put the link to where you shows your GitHub account. Then add 2 more sections over here, and we're going to add a link to your LinkedIn and a link to your Twitter. Out of those, maybe you don't want to show your Twitter, but I don't know. And then put the actual links over here. Now, why do we make this array? Because we want to map through it. Now, I need to put it inside of here. I'm going to map through each item. And for each item, I'll get the social. I'll also get the index. And I'm going to render an A tag that is going to be the link to the item. Now, I can access this. I can't just do this to render the actual icons. These are components. That's how Lucid React works. So to get this as a component and render, I have to do the following. I have to say open and close this, and it's going to be self-closing. And then I get the social item dot icon. And now it should render each icon, as you can see. Then I also want to make it such that when you click on this link, it takes you to that link. I also pass a key here just so that because it's a list, you don't have to do that. And then in href, I'm going to pass here the social.href. Now again, mine won't take you anywhere, but yours should definitely be taking you to your individual pages. Then on this div, let's start styling this by setting a flex, items center, a gap of 4, and I'm gonna use the animate fade in and apply a delay of 400 now, because you add 100 to every single new item you add. Then on this span, I'm gonna add here a text size to be small and the color to be muted foreground. Then on the individual icons, here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna say padding of 2, rounded, full. Then we're gonna apply the glass effect on each of them. And when you hover it, we're gonna make it the background be green. So primary, but only 10% of it. So we'll divide it by 10. So it looks a bit like this. Then we also wanna set the hover to set the color to be primary so that the icon colors changes to green when you hover it as well. And then I wanna make it such that it transitions all and has a duration of 300. Whenever you have a transition with your colors and all, you can actually make it a lot smoother by adding a transition, and you can specify what kind of transition you want to add and the duration of it. So you can see as I hover it, it does become a lot more smooth. Now we're pretty much done. Let me just add a specific size to each icon. We're gonna make it be 5 and 5 on both of them, so they're a little bit smaller. And now, as you can see, oh, this text says follow me. So probably we'll do the same thing here. Follow me. As you can see, we're almost done. The only thing we need to do now is add the image. Now for the image, it's gonna be the right column. So right below this right column over here, we're gonna add a div for this section. Now, how's this gonna work? Well, we're gonna have first the profile image, which is going to be rendered by showing a div over here, and we're gonna put another div for the actual image. And then on this image, I'm going to put the source to be that of my profile photo, which you should name the same thing. Now it appears over here. I also want to put an alt, and the alt here, put your name, because if whoever is reading your thing has a disability, they can know who you are. Then I'm going to put a class name of this, where I set the width to be full, the aspect to be 4 out of 5. That's really important. And then the object, of course, to be cover. And I'm going to set a border radius of 2XL, so it slightly moves. Now, what do we want to do? Well, I want to make it such that when we come here to this div, it actually, even if it expands, it appears as a card, right? Not just a random image in the middle of the website. So to do that, I'm going to apply here a class name of position relative, and I'm going to also animate fade in, but put an animation delay of 300. Then on this one, we're going to set position relative and a max width of medium, so it's a bit smaller, and then a margin X of auto, so it's centered. Then on this div over here, we're going to set the position to be relative, and also to have the glass background, and for it to be rounded 3XL, which is not exactly the same, but it will look perfectly fine. A padding of 2, so it has that little border, and I'm gonna add a glow border. What is glow border? Well, it's gonna be a class that we need to create over here, and it's gonna be the last class that we create on our components layer. It's basically the same thing as a glow text, but for borders. It creates this little glow around a border. Now we go back here to the hero, and there's one more thing I want to do. I want to add a glowing ring around the image. So above this div, I want to add the following div. Now this div will add even more of a glow around it. However, we need to create a little animation where it actually pulsates. There's this animate pulsate glow, which is wrong. It should actually just be animate pulse, and then it makes this little pulsing animation around the image. Now we want to create the stats cards that goes around the image. So we're going to start by setting right below this div over here, but still inside of the div of the image, but after the image, we're going to set two things: the floating badge and also the stats badge. Now for the floating badge, I want to add a div which will contain another div, and then a self-closing div, you'll see why, and then a span that just says that you're available for work. Then I want to set the class name of this to be position absolute, because it's absolute inside of this card. I'm going to set it to be negative to the bottom 4. So it's basically a little bit below the bottom, and negative to the right. So you see negative right of 4. So it's also a little bit to the right. And then we're going to make the background be glass. We're going to make it be rounded. So I need to change this to say D. And then I'll make the padding X to be 4. And then a padding Y of 3. And then I'm going to add another type of animation. This is going to be an animate animate float. Now, animate float is going to make it such that this little card or badge over here will actually look like it's floating. To create this animation, we'll create the keyframes for it by setting the start positioning to be at 0, and then it will at 50% move a little bit up. And then we'll create the actual animate class called animate float, set it to be 4 seconds long, and it's infinite. So it will always look like it's going up and then going down, and then going up and then going down. Now, we'll do this for the other one as well, but before we get that, we need to actually set a display flex here, items to be centered, and then a gap of 3. Then in this div, we want to set the width to be 3, the height to be 3, and I want it to be like a green indicator. So it will be a green color, so 500, to indicate that you're like available for work, right? It's a square because obviously it's a square by default, but we need to make it into a circle by setting the rounded to full. And then I'm going to use the animate pulse default animation from Tailwind to make it like it's pulsing. Now on this pen, all we want to do is just set the text to be small and then set the font to be medium. Now we build the stats badge. This one will be very similar, but just a bit different because it's going to be at the top. Now to start things off, I'm going to just add here the actual stats that you have. Now, what stats do you want to put? I don't know. Put something that makes sense for you. I'm just going to put that I have 5 years of experience by adding here a div and then another div that says years experience. And then on this div, we're going to set the position to be absolute, and we'll make it be at the top again. And then we'll make it negative left 4. Then we're going to make it glass, rounded XL. Pretty much the same thing we did for the other one. Padding X of 4, padding Y of 3, animate float. But this one will have an animation delay of 500. Then on this one, we're going to set the text to be 2XL, the font to be bold, and the text color to be primary. On this one, we're going to actually make it a lot smaller. Text extra small, and it's actually going to be grayish colored. So muted foreground. Perfect. Now we're pretty much done. And it's time for just to add the list of skills that you have on your resume. Well, to do this, we need to first create a list of all the skills that we want to list out. So I'll create here an array called skills, and you fill in with strings of technologies and frameworks and whatever soft skills you want to put as your skills. Now, I literally just generated this. This is just what it's the default, what you need to know if you're going to be working as a full stack web dev nowadays. I would say it's around this, and I just added as a template here, but you should put whatever you feel comfortable with. Then you come down here, and right below here, we're going to add the skills section. Now, we'll start by adding a div and a p tag that says technologies I work with. Then we're going to add another div that is going to have a div that renders that list. Now, we're doing a little bit of a trick here with that list. We're going to make that list we're going to do a little bit of a trick here with that list. I'm going to make that into a different list that has the same skills twice. So I'm going to use this, which basically puts the entire list inside of here, and then do it again. Remember, I'm just using the skills array that we created here. Now, did it not actually use it? I forgot to put curly braces to use JavaScript. Then I want to map through this, get each skill and each index, and then render a div that inside of it will have a span and render the individual skill. Now, it looks like this, and definitely that's not how we want it to look. But first, let's set the key to be the index, and then we'll start by building the top here. We'll set a class name of margin top of 20 to create some space. Then we'll use the animate fade in with a delay of 600. Then on this paragraph tag, I'm gonna set the text to be small, the color to be muted foreground, margin bottom of 6, and a text center. Then on this div, I want to set the position to be relative and the overflow to be hidden. Then on this div, we're going to set the display to be flex. And here's the kicker. Everything now appears one right next to each other, but we want to make them animate by moving from one side to the other, right? So we're going to have to make a really cool animation. We're going to call this animate marquee, just like this. Now, to create this animation, we'll come here and we'll create the marquee keyframes. It just basically says that at the start, the item will be at the middle or wherever it's supposed to be, and then it will move 50% to the left. When it moves 50% to the left, because the list has the items twice, the other items should be appearing at a certain point. So it will never look like the list is ending or the animation is ending, because it will constantly be moving and reappearing at the other side. Now we also want to create the animate class. So I'll create here the animate market class. We're making it actually take forever, 30 seconds, because it will look a lot smoother, as you can see. We'll make it linear and infinite so that it never stops. And then it keeps going to the left, and then it will never actually stop. Now, the next thing we need to do is actually apply some styles so that this doesn't look disgusting like it does right now. So we'll start with this. We're going to set the class name for the entire div to flex shrink 0, so it doesn't actually Tailwind CSS doesn't appear with the CSS below. Then we're setting a padding X of 8 and a padding Y of 4. That looks a lot better already. Now for the individual skills, I want to set the text to be XL, the font to be semi-bold, the text to be muted foreground, and then make that be 50% opacity. Then when you hover it, I want to make it be text muted foreground so that when you hover it, it becomes a little bit more clear. But also I'm applying the transition colors, which will make it such that it's a little bit smoother when I do hover it. Perfect. This is pretty much done. There's just one more thing. If you look over here, when we have this, just one more thing. If you look here, we have this little scroll button where it has this animation, and when I click on it, it actually should scroll for me. Now I'm in mobile mode, so this doesn't really matter that much, but we're going to add that scroll indicator. Now I'm going to copy and paste that scroll indicator because I didn't make that one just for this website. I always use the same scroll indicator. I'll just go over what it means. Now, what we do is we go right below the section and we copy and paste this class and import this icon at the top. I'm just going to go up here and then import the chevron down icon. Now I'll explain what each of these means. Basically, if I go down here, you see it appears now. On the top div here, we set the position to be absolute because we need to make it at the absolute bottom and middle. We also made it be the last thing to appear. And when you click on it, it takes you to the about, which is going to be the next section we're going to be building. Then it's simple display flex, just making it appear at the bottom. And here's what we do. The chevron down, right, this icon, the reason why it's bouncing is because there is a default animation in Tailwind CSS called animate bounce. By setting animate to bounce, it creates this little bouncing animation on whatever element you create. Now, that should pretty much be it. But I don't know if you guys noticed something. There's one thing that we should have addressed before, but we never did. However, we never did, not because I forgot, but because I wanted to present the issue before showing the solution. And that is that when you scroll down, you see that the navbar overlaps with everything and it looks really ugly. I don't know if you thought that this was how it's supposed to be. It's not, right? Now, to address that, we're going to actually come to our navbar and we need to make some changes to it. This is the final result. When the user scrolls, it will actually set a background with the glassy look to it. Now to do that, here's what we have to do. We have to detect if the user has scrolled or not. Now to do that, we're going to create another state over here and call it is scrolled. It's a boolean that determines if the user scrolled or not. And it's going to be true or false. Now, to actually detect to see if the user scrolled, it's pretty simple. We have to set a use effect, which is going to run at the start of when the component first renders. Now we need to make sure to add an empty dependency array here, or else it will break our website. Then I want to subscribe to an event. What event do I want to subscribe? I want to subscribe to listen to whenever the user scrolls their mouse. To do that, I attach to the window and add an event listener. I want to listen to when the user scrolls. Now I want to call a function every time the user scrolls that handles something. So I'll create here a handle scroll function that is going to be called every single time the user scrolls through the page, even if it's the smallest amount of scroll. Now, what do I want to do here? Well, if the user has scrolled, right, below the height of this navbar, which is 50, then we know that they scrolled past it and now something should be happening. So this should become true. So if the window.scroll y is greater than 50, that's how I detect it, then I want to set is scrolled to true. Else I'll set it to false. Or I could also just simplify this logic and write it like this. Now, because we added an event listener, we want to prevent memory leaks in React by returning and unsubscribing to this event listener when the component unmounts. Or else it's going to subscribe to that event and maybe, I don't know, for some reason the component will unmount and it will never unsubscribe. So by adding this logic over here where it returns a callback function, this lets us remove the event listener at the stage in which the component is unmounting. Now we have that logic, but what do we do with it? Well, to start things off, let's go to this header class name that we put right at the beginning. And in here, we're going to change this to actually be dynamic. So I'm going to put dynamic classes, and I want to check to see if and I'll put it right over here. If the user has scrolled, then I don't want to set the BG to be transparent and the padding Y to be 5. Actually, I want to do something else. If the user haven't scrolled, I want to do that. So I'll do this. Now, if the user has scrolled, then I want to set the background to be of glass strong, that class we created, and also the padding in the Y direction to be 3. You'll notice now that when I scroll, absolutely nothing happens still. Oh, actually it does. See, perfect. It sets the background to be glass strong. Now, there's a little bit of an animation, as you can see over there, of fitting in when we do reach the top. So we can still do that. For now, it already looks kind of good when we do this. Now, how do we get that smooth animation? Well, it's pretty simple. By adding here a transition all, I'll put it over here right before this, transition all, we're basically telling Tailwind that there's going to be a transition on this thing. And whenever it changes, we want to set a specific duration for how long we want that to happen. I'm going to set it to 500. So you see it adapts right in front of us. Perfect. And by the way, this is the page in normal mode. So like not in mobile mode. Already looks very cool. And that's pretty much it for the hero section. Now, we have to create the about section, the project section, the experience section, and the testimonials. But don't worry, because the first few sections are always the most time consuming. The rest are gonna come a lot easier. So let's close this off and let's start with the about section. I'll come over here and we'll start by defining what do we want to talk about ourselves. If you go to the final product over here, you'll see that it has obviously a bunch of text, but it also has some like individual features and highlights that you want to make about yourself. So there's here that I write clean code, that I'm good with performance, I improve performance of websites, I'm good at collaboration and innovation. So what I want to do is I want to create a list on this about page that is going to keep track of those highlights. So I'll create here highlights, and for each highlight, we want to keep track of the icon used for the highlight, the title, and the description. So for the icon, I'm just going to write this first one. I'm going to use the code to icon. It's this icon over here. The title, I'm going to say clean code. And then for the description, I'm going to just put whatever is over here as a string. So make this for you and also add 4 of them. I'll just copy and paste all 4 of them and I'll be back in a second. Perfect. I just added the 4 of them, but we're not even going to touch them right now. Let's just start building the infrastructure of this. So to start off, I want to create a div inside of here. Now this div is going to separate this section into 2, right? So I'll create another div here and we're going to have the left column, which is going to be some text. Now for the left column in the about section, we want to have a text, right? We're going to have the title of the section. It should be inside of here. So I'll make a div, and then inside of this div, we're going to make a span that will have the text for the title. Now, this should appear down here. It will create some space. Actually, I'll already do that. I'll set this to have a padding Y of 32, position to be relative, and the overflow to be hidden. Then you'll see that it will have a lot more space now. We also want to make this into a section. What do I mean by that? Well, when I click on the About section, right, I want to be taken to the About section. So to do that, I need to set this to have an ID of About. Because if you remember from our Navbar, when I click on each of the links, it takes us to the hashtag and then the name of the link. If you're familiar with how links work, this means it will scroll down to whatever element in your page has that ID. So if I click here on the About, it should scroll down to the About section. Now, one thing that I just want to do real quick before we continue, if you notice, I want to also close the navbar when I click on the link, right? So I can actually do that in mobile. So if I go to the mobile nav over here, I can add an on click to this and make it such that if you click on any of the links, it's going to set is mobile menu open to false. Same thing with the contact button, which right now we don't have the actual section for the contact section. We'll create that, but for now, at least when we click on this, it should close it. So let's try again. I'm going to go to the About section. You see it also closes that menu. Perfect. Now let's go back over here and let's continue. Now the next section I want to put here is the headline. So it's going to be an H2 tag that is going to say something like this: building the future. And then below this, we're going to add a span that is going to say another type of tagline. I'm going to say one component at a time, since this developer here is a React developer. So what is this? Well, it's this section over here. About me is going to be the small title of the section, and then building the future one component at a time. That's why we separated the first part of the H2 tag and the span, because this span should be in a different font. Now we want to actually apply this. Now, one thing you might notice is that there is no spacing between building the future one component at a time. It's because there is actually no space in here. We can force it by adding that, or we could also just add an empty space over here by doing this. But I think you guys will understand better if I just do it like this, because then there's a little bit of a space. Now, before we continue, let's actually start adding the rest of the classes. So over here on this div, I'm going to add a class name. We're going to say that this is a container and that the margin X is auto. You notice that now when we also add a padding X of 6, there's going to be some space, and then we'll set the position to be relative and the Z index to be 10. Then on this part of the column over here, we're going to set everything to be a display grid. Now, depending on, we're going to do the same style that we did before, where if this is opened up, it's going to be 2 columns. If it's mobile, it's going to be just 1 column. So to do that, what we have to do is when it's anything less than a large screen, it will just have 1 column. But when it's large and above, we're going to set the grid calls to be 2. Then we'll set a gap of 16 in between the different items, and we want to center them. Perfect. Now for the left column, I'm going to set a space in the Y direction of 8, and I'm going to add another div. Actually, this was a mistake. I need to add another div over here and then close this div over here. And then on this div, I want to set the class name to just animate fade in, so it has that little animation that we created. Then on this span, I want to set the text color to be secondary foreground, the text to be small, the font to be medium, the tracking to be wider, and I'll also uppercase this. I could also just make it uppercase, but I'll force it to be uppercased. Then for this H2 tag over here, it's going to be a lot more. We're going to make the text be 4XL in small screens. Then on medium screens, we're going to make that be 5XL, and then the font will be bold. The leading will be tight. We're going to animate fade in, but because this is going to be the second animation, we're going to have to put a delay of 100, and we're going to set the color to be secondary foreground, which will make it the green. However, only the first part should be green. This part should actually be white and also be a different font. So we'll come to the span. We're going to first change the font by saying font serif, and now it should be this little really cool font. We're going to make it italic, and then I'm going to set the font to be normal, and so it's not bold. And then I'm going to set the text to be white. Perfect. Now you want to put a very large section talking about yourself, like actually talking about yourself, for those who are interested in reading. Now you can add whatever you want, but it's going to go below this H2 over here. And I were just going to copy and paste what I wrote here. You can put something that makes sense for you, but make it into 3 separate paragraphs, or how many paragraphs you want to put. Then for this div, we're going to set the space Y to have a gap of 4, so each paragraph has a space in between them. Then we're going to set the color to be muted foreground, so it is that same gray. And then we're going to set the animate fade in and the animation delay to be more than 100, so 200. So here's how it looks. See how it appears way better? Perfect. Now let's have a section that's going to be acting as if like it's a mission statement. See, my mission is to create, whatever. You don't have to make it as corny as what I made over here, but make it to be something that stands out whenever the reviewers or whoever is trying to hire you checks your website. So below this div over here, I'm going to add a div for the mission statement. I'm going to add a p tag, and I'll copy and paste the mission statement. Now, what styles do we want? Well, I want to make the whole div to be a glass. I also want to make it be very rounded, but not fully rounded, just very big because it's very wide. I'm going to put a padding of 6, so there's some space to it. It looks like a card. Then I want to set that glow border effect that we created, and I want to set the animate fade in and set the delay that is more than the last one we did, which was 200. We're going to make it 300 this time. Then on this paragraph, I want to set the text to be large, the font to be slightly bold, so I'll say medium, and then I'll set the font to be italic and the color to be foreground. Perfect. Now we're almost done. We just have to set up everything for the right column. The right column is going to have the highlights. Now, just in case you're confused, when I say right column and left column, it's just for the desktop mode. In mobile, it's going to be all in one column. But this is what we want to build, is the highlights, right? Now, we added this already, and we're finally going to use it. We created this array over here. So we're already ready to go to be able to make this. So what we want to do is we want to create a div that will have a class name of grid. And even on a small screen, but above that, we're going to set it to be 2 columns. We're also setting a gap of 6 in between them. And then inside of this div, we're just going to loop through the highlights, map each of them, get each item and their index. And then for each item, each highlight, I want to render a div that is going to have another div inside with the icon of the highlight, right? We know that each highlight has an icon, a title, and a description. We'll start with the icon. We're just going to render it. And since it's a component, to render it, we have to say item.icon and then self-close the component. Now, there is an error here. It's just because we have to close this div. So we'll close it. And now we at least see all 4 icons. We also want to see the title and the description. For the title, I'm going to add an H3 and just render the item.title. Then below this, I'm going to add a p tag that will render the item.description. Perfect. Now I want to add the styles for this. I'll start by adding a key, which will be the index. And then for the class name, I want to set this to have each of them have a glass background, a padding of 6, a rounded 2XL, similar to what we did with this. Then we're going to set the group, because then we'll apply Then I want to set an animate fade in so that they all animate and fade in together. However, I want them to fade in a sequential manner. What do I mean by that? When I want them to fade in, I don't want them to appear all at the same time. I want them to appear this first, then this, then this, then this. To make that sequential order inside of a list, there's a couple ways to do it. Doing it in Tailwind requires us to do a bunch of stuff that would be overly complicated. So we can just do it very easily through this style, because what we can do is we can set an animation delay over here. And what we can do is we can set the delay to be a certain amount of milliseconds. And that certain amount can be an increment of hundreds of milliseconds. But that means that this one should appear at 100 milliseconds of delay, this one 200, this one 300, this one 400. The way we make this is we are inside of a list. So we can just get the index of each of them in the array and multiply it times 100. Because then, for example, this first one over here, it will have index 0. So that wouldn't be a really good thing for us to do. What we could do instead is get the index, add 1 to it. So it will have a 1 times 100, that would make it into 100 milliseconds, right? If I multiply this times 100, now this string becomes 100 milliseconds, and the delay is 100 milliseconds. This one should have index of 1, which 1 plus 1 is 2, times 100 is 200 milliseconds, and so on. This should have 300 and this 400. And now you should see that if I refresh this, it appears in kind of like sequential order. Perfect. Now we'll come to this div over here with the icon, and we're going to do a couple things. We're going to set the width to be 12, the height to be 12, and for the whole thing to be very rounded. Then we're going to set the BG color of it to be primary, but we don't want it to be super green. We're just going to give it 10% opacity. Then I'll set the display to flex because the icon is not centered. So I'll just set it to be center, and I'll also justify it to be center so it's also centered horizontally. Then a margin bottom of 4, and then I'll set a hover where when you hover it, it's going to set the BG to be primary, but 20. So that there's a small hover effect when you hover each of the icons. Perfect. Now we also want to apply individual colors. So on this icon over here, we're going to set the width of it to be 6, the height to be 6, but then the color is going to be text primary. So the icon is green. Then for this H3 tag over here, it's not going to be much. We're just going to set the text to be large, the font to be semi-bold, and we're going to set a margin bottom of 2. Then on the B tag, I'm just going to set the text to be small and the text to be muted foreground to make it gray. Perfect. And that's pretty much it for the About section. Now we have this beautiful About section that works both in desktop mode and also in mobile. Now it's time for us to build the Project section. So I'm going to come over here, go to the Project section, and we'll start by defining which projects we want to have in our website. To do that, I'm going to create here an array called projects similar to what we did with the highlights. Now, each project will have the following. It's going to have a title. It's going to have a description. I'm just going to already add the titles. The first example project I'm going to add is going to be a fintech dashboard, but you add whatever information for which project you have. Then for description, I have this over here. It's a comprehensive financial analytics, whatever. It's just like a normal description for your project. Then below this, we're going to set an image. Now, add the images that you want. If you want to use my images, remember, they're not actually related to the project itself. They all exist in the public folder inside of a folder called projects. I added projects that I've built for my YouTube channel, but you should add whatever you prefer. Now, to access them, I'll start by saying projects / and then access the project number.png. Then I'll add in a list of tags. These are tags that are related to the project. So if you go to the list of projects here, you see that they have little tags at the bottom. So I'm going to add that by adding a list and then adding whatever technologies you use, like React, TypeScript, and I don't know, I'm going to use Node.js. And then below this, you add a link. The link should probably be to the demo website that you have this. I'm just going to put an empty link. I don't have anything for this. And also a GitHub link, which you put the link to the repository. Highly recommend that you do this. This is pretty much it. You do this for all of your projects, and when you're done, you should be able to have a list like the following. Perfect. Just this list over here. We have another example here, an e-commerce platform, an AI writing assistant, and a project management tool. You make however many projects you want, and then we're ready to get started. So what I want to do first is the same thing we did here on the About section. Most sections are going to start pretty much the same thing. It's going to have an ID and it's going to have these classes. Also, I'll also copy this just so that we can also have that, and I'll put it directly over here. That means that I also have to close this div, so I'll do that, and I'll put some space here because it looks like everything is broken. What did we do here? Well, we created we gave an ID for this section. I'm going to call it projects, and we just set the padding Y to be 32, same thing we did before, and we created a container inside of it. Then what I want to do is outside of this container, I want to add some background accents. They're going to be like background glows that are going to exist. And I'm just going to copy and paste them just because we already worked on making one for this section over here. And it's pretty much the same thing. It's just a little section, glow that appears at the top, and it should really give a nice accent to the page. Then inside of this div, what we're going to do is the following. We're going to build out the section header, which is going to be pretty much very similar to also the one for the About page, where we have a section just like this, where it's going to have a title and it's going to have this H2 here with the spans. Now to do that, I'm going to create here a div, then a span, and I'm going to say featured work. Then below the span, I'm going to add an H2, which is going to say projects that, and then I'm adding a span, giving a space and say make an impact, just like this. Now we want to do the same thing we did here where we do this, but we want to center it this time. So it gives a little bit of a different feel to it. So to do that, I'm going to first set a class name to this where I'm going to center the text. Then I'm going to set the margin X to be auto, and I'll set the max width to be 3XL, a margin bottom of 16. And then below on this featured work span, I'm going to set the color to be secondary foreground. A text is going to be small and the font is going to be medium with a tracking that is going to be wider. We're going to uppercase it, and we're going to add the animation. So animate, fade in. Perfect. Then on this H2, we're going to make the text be way bigger for Excel, but then on larger screens, we're going to make that be 5. We're going to set the font to be bold and the margin top to be 4 with the margin bottom to be 6. Then we're going to add the animation with a delay of 100. Because this is the second thing on the section. Now we're also setting the color to be secondary foreground. Perfect. Now we just want to differentiate a bit the make an impact section, just like we did on the About one. I'm just going to come here and I'm going to copy the same class we had here and then just paste it in this pen. Perfect. Now we can just add a p tag that it goes below this H2 tag and will be the small description of the section. You can put just a sentence or two to describe what this section is. I'm going to say it's a selection of my recent work, from complex web applications to innovative tools that solve real world problems. We want to make that be not that standing out on the page because the title should do that. So I'm going to make the color be the gray color, so muted foreground. And then I'm going to set the animate fade in and a delay of 200. Then we're pretty much done with this section. Now, the next section is going to be the projects grid, where we show all the projects. But on a bigger screen, it should show the projects in two columns. And a smaller screen, they should show up one on top of each other. So to do that, what I want to do is I want to create the div, and I want to set the class name to be grid. And similar to what we've done multiple times already, I'm going to set the on a medium screen and above to have 2 columns. And I'll set a gap of 8 in between each of them. Now we're going to render each of them by looping through the projects array. We'll map through it, get each project, get the index, and then I'll start by rendering a div. This div will have the following. I'm going to close it, and then I'll have a div in here, and this will serve as the div for the image, right? The image of the project. And on this div, I'll just show the image. I'll render it by saying source and then applying in the source a project.image. Then I'll show the alt to be the title of the project, and you see that now all 4 images appear. Then I want to set the class name of it to have a width full, height full, and for it to be object cover. And I want to set there to be a transition transform with a duration of 700, because what I want to do is when I hover it, I want it to actually scale the image a bit. But to do that, I want it to be a group scale. So I'm going to apply that logic actually to this div at the top over here. So to do that, we'll apply a key. I'm going to do index, and then we're going to add a class name. And in here, I'm going to set a class name of group, then glass. Then I'm going to set it to be rounded to XL. We're going to set the overflow to be hidden. When you hover it, actually not when you hover it, but there's going to be a animate fade in, and I'm setting the medium on a medium screen and above. I'm going to set the span of the row to be 1. Now it applies to everything, but then we want to do that same logic that we did before with the about section, where each of them has a small delay depending on the index, this style over here. So we'll copy that. We're going to apply it to this div. And then in the image section, here's what we want to do. We want to set the class name to be relative, then the overflow to be hidden, and I'm going to set the aspect to be video. So all of them has similar heights. It kind of zooms in a bit so that it all fits on this aspect ratio. Then I want to set the hover, where when I hover it, it should expand just like this. To do that, it's actually not that hard. We set the transition to be transform and the duration to be 700. 700 is the amount of milliseconds that it takes to actually expand. What I do then is I'm going to set a group hover and set the scale to be 110. 110 meaning 10% more than 100, which is its original scale. And now all of them will scale very smoothly. If you want to make it even more smoother, you can just increase this value to 900 or whatever. If you want to make it quicker, you can make it at 100 and then it goes very quick. But 700 is the sweet spot in my opinion. Now what we do is we have this image. I want to just add a little gradient that should go around the image. I'm going to apply it just like this. It's a gradient that goes from the top to the bottom, and it kind of fades in the image so that it doesn't stand out that much, since the colors might not match the color of our website. Then I want to add the overlay link. It's this links that appear over here, and it should take you either to the demo or to the GitHub. Now to do that, I'm going to add a section here, overlay links, and I'll add a div that will render a tag for the demo, which should be just an arrow. I'm going to use the arrow up right icon. It's an arrow on the upright direction, so it should appear over here. It's currently not appearing anywhere, I think, but it will appear later. And then we'll add another link, but this one is for the GitHub, so I'll change this to say GitHub. Now to make them appear, I'm going to actually have to make this be position absolute and then try to center them. I'm going to set the inset to be 0. Now they're over here. Then I'm going to set the display to be flex, the items to be center, justify center, and then I'm going to set the gap in between them to be 4, so there's a space, opacity to be 0. Now you might be wondering, why did I make it opacity 0? It doesn't make any sense. Well, only when you hover it, then the opacity becomes 100. So you see, only when I hover it, it actually appears. Then I want to set the transition opacity. So we decide how long we want that opacity transition to be. I'm going to make it 300 so it goes in a bit slowly as well. Great. Now, in this A tag, I'll put an href that should take them to whatever their demo website is. So I'll say project.link to link that. Then for the class name, I'll set a simple padding to be 3. I'll make it look like a circle, so rounded full. I'll set it to be glass as the background, so it looks like this, as you can see. And then the last thing is I want to make it such that when you hover it, the BG will become primary, and also the color will become the foreground of a primary background. And I'll set a transition all at the end. Perfect. For the icon, I'll just set the width to be 5 and the height to be 5 as well. Now we want to copy this, paste it over here. I'll even copy this as well, paste it over here. We'll change this to just say GitHub. Now you see that I can go on each of them and click on it and it should take you somewhere. Now I honestly didn't put a link, so that's why it's taking me to the start, but it works on every single one of these images. Perfect. Now what do we want to do? We want to add the content for the project. So this section over here at the bottom. So we'll go down 2 divs below that, the overlay links, and we'll render the content. Now for the content, I'll add a div, also close a div over here. And inside of this div, I'll add another div, close that one as well. And I'm going to add an h3 tag that has the project.title. Then I'll add an arrow up right, similar to how we did with the overlay link, and that will serve as actually a indication that you can click on it to go somewhere. Then below this div, I'm going to add a p tag that shows the project description. Then below this p tag, I'm going to add another div, and in here we want to do a loop inside of this loop. We want to loop through the list of tags and render them individually. So I'm going to say project.tags.map, and then for each tag, I'm going to get it. I'm also going to get the tag index. We can't call it index because we're already inside of a loop that has a index variable. And then we're going to return for each tag a span that should represent that tag. So I'll just show the tag in here, and now we should see just the tags appearing as words, right? It's a list, but it appears as a word. Now we're pretty much done adding the stuff for the content, but all of the styles should go in, or else this will look very ugly. For the content, I'm going to set the padding to be 6 and there to be a gap in the y direction between each of the different sections. Already a lot better. Then here, I'll set the display to be flex, the items to be start, but I want to justify between so that the name of the project and this link have a huge space in between them. One is on the side and the other one is in the other. Then on this h3 tag, I'm going to set the text to be Excel, the font to be semi-bold, and then I'll set a group hover, which should have a text primary, and I'll set the transitions to be colors. Then we are good with the title, but for this up arrow right, I'm going to apply a bunch of class names. It's pretty much the same class names we added for the other icons. So I'll just keep it the same like this. You can take a look at it. But basically, the main difference here is that when we hover it, we translated a bit to the right. That's how you translate stuff on a hover in Tailwind. You set it translates on the X direction by 1 and on the Y direction by 1. So when I hover this should move 1 to the right and 1 up. And it has this really cool effect. Then I want to add a class name for the description. In here, I'll set the text to be muted foreground and the text to be small. Then on this div, I want to set the class name to be a display flex. Then I'm going to set a flex wrap in case any of the text have a line that breaks and a gap of 2 in between them so they don't look like they're all one word. Now for each tag, what I want to do is I want to set the padding X to be 4 and then also a very small padding Y, because a pill usually is more wide than it is tall. Then I'm going to make it be rounded full, and I'll make the BG to have a color of surface. If you remember, surface is one of the colors that we defined right at the beginning. It's just a variation of the other colors that we have. Then what I want to do is after this, I want to set the text to be extra small, a font to be medium, and I want to set the border for it to be a border, but that color should have the default border color that we defined in the beginning, but only 50% opacity of that. So it's barely visible, but it does have some effect to it, especially when we add the hovering. I'll also make the color be muted foreground, and then I'm going to set a hover where when you hover it, the border is going to become primary and then divide that by 50. So it's currently very slow, and then when I hover it, it becomes the green color that we're all used to. Also, let's change the color of the text when we hover. So when you hover it, we'll set the text to be primary. We'll set it to have a transition just because it's all very messed up. Transition of everything will have a duration of 300. You see that now when I hover it, it has a lot of a smoother effect. Perfect. I also want to use this tag index as the key because remember, we have to do that in React. Now, we're pretty much done with the project section. There's just one small thing, which is in case you want to link like your entire GitHub, I don't know, you want to take them to every single project you've ever built, there's going to be this button for view all projects. It's very similar to the button we have here for download CV. That's why I created that as a component so that we can just reuse it very quickly. So I want to go to that download the animated border button that we created. I'm going to copy this. I'll come back here and then below this div, but not still inside of the last div and inside of the section, I want to add the view all call to action. I'll add a div that should render the animated border. Is that not even gonna show up? Yeah, animated border button, and then I have to import that. So I'll come over here, I'll import from, and then I'll do @/components/animated border button, and I'll import the animated border button. Now we have to put it shouldn't be self-closing. It should allow me to put a text here. But if you remember, when we created this animated border button over here, we didn't make it such that it accepts children so that we can customize the actual info inside of it. So we want to change that. I'm going to remove this, or I'm going to add a children as part of the props. And I'm going to make the children here be what is rendered instead of this label. I'll keep this exactly the same, but I'll just render the children here. Then I'm going to copy this and I'm going to put it back on the hero section, which is where we call it the first time. So where we call the animated border button, instead of making it self-closing, I'm just going to do this where I paste that over here. Then we'll import this download icon as part of what we import from Lucid, and it should keep it the same. But what that means is that now we can pretty much do the same thing for this view all button. I'll come here to where we have our projects, and I'm going to add the following. It's going to be the view all projects and the arrow upright, which is that same icon we already have, where we set the text to be center, a margin top to be 12. Then we're going to animate fade in, and we're going to set a delay in that animation to be of 500. Perfect. Now we have this beautiful project section created, and we're almost done with the website. Like I said, this website takes a lot longer in the beginning to build, but after that, we already have a lot of the initial knowledge set up. Now, as you can see, the only stuff that we have left is to add the experience section, the testimonials, and the contact. So we're going to do that really quick. Okay, so now let's make the experience section. This section is pretty interesting because it shows the timeline of events of your previous jobs, or I don't know, anything notable, curriculum, studies, whatever you want to put. To start things off, we want to create a list that is going to represent the different experiences we have, similar to what we did with the projects and also with the highlights. So I already created my list, and I want you to create something similar. It's going to be a list called experiences, and it's going to have objects inside of it. Now, we want to put the following: the period of when that experience happened. So you should make it in order where like the oldest experience is at the bottom of the list and the latest it's at the top. So you see the bottom one goes from 2018 to 2019. The current one goes from 2022 to present. Then you put the role, if you were just an engineer, a student, whatever, the company name, the description of the job, the list of technologies, and if it is current or not. Technically, only one of them should be current unless you are multi-jobbing, which, I don't know, maybe you are. So make sure to put false as current for all the other ones, and then only one of them will be true. Now we can start building the section. We're going to copy the same intro to the section as we did with the about and the projects page, and we're going to set the ID to be experience. Then inside of here, we want to add a background glow similar to what we did with the project section. This one will be as follows. You can add it if you want to, and it should look a bit like this. Then below this, we're going to add the same kind of container-like div that we added also on the projects and on the about section. Both this, and this, they were all done exactly the same as how we did on the other sections, so you can just copy and paste. Another thing that is very similar is if you go over here, you see that this section over here is very similar to not the one from projects, but the one from the about me. So we're already kind of used to doing that. Now to structure this, we're going to have here the section header, and we're going to put here a div that should have a class name of max width of 3XL, and I'm going to set a margin bottom to be 16. Then in this div, I want to set here a span that is going to say career journey. Then a section that is going to have a title. So we're going to say experience that, and then put a span like we did before, because this part is going to be with italics. We're going to say speaks volumes. Put a space in between this so it actually has a space, and we're good to go. Now for the classes, we're going to just copy and paste the classes that we added for the about and project section. For this span, we're going to add a text secondary to make it be green, and we're also going to uppercase it and animate the whole thing in. For the H2, we're going to add a lot more. We want to make it big and fully primary, and also add a small animation delay to it. Finally, for the span, we want to add the italic and the font serif so that it stands out as well. Now, the next thing I want to do is add a small paragraph. We've done this on the other sections as well, so I'll just copy and paste it, and it should go below the H2 tag. It's just going to have a text muted foreground, and it should animate with a delay of 200 so that it comes after the first part of the title. Great. Now we're done with the section header. So we're going to go down a div, and we're going to build the timeline. Now to build the UI for the timeline, it's going to be a bit different from what we've done because it's a very specific UI, and there's a lot of cool effects that we have to put. To start things off, I'm going to set a container div that is going to be position relative. Then I'm going to add the vertical line. This vertical line is going to be this line that shows up over here. You see, it's a vertical line that goes from the top of the section to the bottom, and it slowly fades out as it goes down. To do this effect, we're going to create this vertical line that is going to have a class of timeline glow. Now, what even is that? Well, that's a class we need to create on our utilities class. Now, I'm going to put it over here. I'll come down at the bottom, and I'm going to add this utility class. It's just a box shadow, and it's going to have a color mix of our primary color to transparent. And depending on the size, it's going to create this slowed fade in effect. Then what we want to do is we want to come back to the experience, and we want to make it such that this vertical line has a position absolute. It's going to start at the left 0, but the thing is, this is only in a small screen. In a small screen, in mobile, it's going to be at the left, but on a big screen, it should be at the bottom, like at the middle, sorry, with this two, the experiences like alternating which sides they're in. So to make this kind of effect, we'll set the medium to be at the middle. When you're using position absolute to center stuff, you set it to be left, and then you make it to be 1/2. So it's 1/2 of the screen. Then what we have to do is set it to be at the top. So top 0 and also bottom 0. Then the width is going to be very small. It's so small that I want to specify it in pixels. It's going to be 2 pixels. We want to set a background to it so that you guys can even see what we're talking about. But we're going to be using a gradient that goes from the top to the bottom. And that's what creates the effect of literally disappearing, right? Together with the glow. Now, this gradient will start with the color primary, but not fully primary, like not the full green color. It's actually going to be 70% opacity. Then it's going to go through the color primary in the middle, but then at 30% opacity. And then finally, it's going to end being transparent. Now, we have to set a translation to it when we are in a medium screen and above so that it's fully centered. So we're going to use the negative translate function in the X direction to be 1/2. Finally, I'll also add a very specific shadow to this item. Now, this shadow over here is going to be the same color that we have, but it's going to be a slight less opacity, as you can see. And I used RGBA so that I could change the opacity directly in the shadow. Now, what we have to do is we have to build the actual section so that because this is going to be the size of this div, but we have nothing on this div. So it basically doesn't show the line. If there's nothing in the timeline, then it doesn't show anything. But if I were to, for example, copy this paragraph tag over here and add something, it will have some space so you see the line actually appears. But we don't want that. We want to create the experience items. So I'll say here experience items. And to do that, we want to use a div that will have a class name of space y12. And then in this div, I want to loop through the experiences list, map each of them, get the experience and the index. And then for each of them, I want to render a div. To start things off with this div, I want to set the key of it to be the index already, so I don't forget. And then inside of this div, I want to render another div that is going to actually determine if the experience is the current one or not. Why? Because if it's the current, we're going to apply this little pulsating animation which the other ones don't have. Now we're going to let that be for later. So I'm going to just create this div and add here that this is the timeline dot. Let's create the rest of this first so that we can even see that. So the content is going to be the most important part. So the content is going to be a div that inside of it, it's going to have another div, and this inner div is going to have a period section. The period is going to be when this experience was from till when. So I'm going to render the experience.period, which is just a text. So it should look like this. Then below this period section, we're going to add an h3 tag that shows the row. So I'm going to say experience.row, then another a p tag this time that shows the company. So experience.company. And then below that, another p tag that shows the description. And finally, we need to render the technologies. So for the technologies, I'm going to actually create a div that should loop through the list of technologies in the similar way to what we did with the tags on the project section. We're going to get the experience, say .technologies.map, map through them, close this off, get the tag, and also create the tag index. Then we're going to render each technology as a pill, similar to what we did before. I'm going to add a span that for now is just going to render the tag. Okay, we have a bunch of stuff. Now let's make it look good. To make it look good, we're going to start off right over here. In this div, we're going to add a class name where we're going to set this to be actually a position relative, grid, and in a medium screen and above, we're going to set this grid to have 2 columns. Remember, the columns are going to alternate. There's going to be a gap of 8 in between them, and I'm also going to use the animate fade in. Now, remember, we don't want them to appear at the same time. Every time we add a fade in animation on a list, we want to add that slight delay that depends on the index. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy and paste that same code we had used multiple times already so that the actual items appear one by one. I refreshed it and you couldn't see it, but that's how it's going to look. If I were to change this to say experience, then you'll be able to see it better. Let me refresh this. You see they appear one by one. Then on the content section, we're going to start by actually making it such that this content section has a dynamic class name, because it's going to depend, especially if we are in a big screen, it's going to depend on whether or not you are on the left or the right side of the screen. How do we determine that? Well, let me show you. If I open this up, you'll see that there's just one column. But on this content section over here, I'm going to make it such that first of all, the padding in the left direction is going to be 8. And on a medium screen, that padding is going to be 0. But then we're going to check to see if the current index is even or odd. Because if it's even, then we're going to align everything to the right. And if it's odd, we're going to align everything to the left. That's how we make it such that they alternate in a medium screen. So we're going to check to see if it's even by doing index modulo 2. And if that leaves the remainder is 0, then we know that it is even. Then we put here that in a medium screen, and that's the case, the padding right is going to be 16. And on a medium screen, and that's the case, the text will be aligned to the right. So it's going to be on the right of the screen. If not, then we're going to do the following. We're going to set in a medium screen, because remember, no matter what, this logic only happens if it's a medium screen and above, not in mobile. We're going to set the column start to, and we're going to set it also to have a padding left of 16. You see that now there is a clear alternation between the items. Now there's a lot more stuff that we want to do to make that look good. So I'm going to go back to mobile and we're going to start building the rest in mobile, because we don't really care about desktop right now, but at least you guys saw that this worked in desktop. Now in this div, what we want to do is we want to add a class name that also is dynamic, because it's also going to have some logic like we did over here. Now the general, that doesn't matter what we're going to apply, is the background is going to be glass. It's going to have a padding of 6, and we're going to make it be very rounded. It's a card, right? Then we're going to set a border with a border color that is actually primary at 30. It's not the border. Then when you hover it, we just increase that border color to be a little bit more visible. So at like 50. Then we're going to apply transition all with a duration of 500. So everything is very smooth. Finally, we want to check to see if it's odd or even. But actually, thinking more about it, I don't think we even need that. Most of what this issue is actually we have to make one small change, but for now we should just leave it as it is. Now the main change that is the main reason why it's broken right now like this is just because we haven't actually made the timeline dot. Currently, this dot is part of the grid, which it shouldn't be because it should actually have a position of absolute so it doesn't affect the rest of the design. When I do that, you see that it actually works. So we just left that for a little bit later, but I wanted to fix that just so you guys don't have a broken section. We're going to come back to this in a second. Let's continue building this section over here. And we'll start by building the UI for the period. For the period, we're going to set the text. Actually, I don't know what happened here. Wait, we'll keep the span. We're at a class name, text to be small. Then we're going to set the color to be primary and the font to be medium. Then on this H3, we're going to set the text to be XL, the font to be semi-bold, and the margin top to be 2. On this B tag, we're going to set the text to be just muted foreground. On this other P tag, we're going to set the text to be small and the color to also be muted foreground, and also a margin top of 4. Finally, we get here to the technologies. On this section, we want to set that the class name is going to be dynamic. Now, why are we making it dynamic? Because we're going to justify it to the end if we are on a medium screen and the thing is aligned to the right. So we'll set a display flex and also flex rep so it doesn't break the line. We're going to set a gap of 2 and a margin top of 4. Then we're going to do that check where we check to see if the index modulo 2 is equal to 0. And if that's the case, then we're just going to justify everything to the right if it's in a medium screen. So we'll justify end. If it's not, then we don't do anything. Now, what happens is we're going to come to the span and we're going to add a padding X of 3, a padding Y of 1 to make it a pill so it doesn't look too big. We're going to set the BG to be surface like we made that other pill. We're going to add the text to be extra small. It's going to be rounded full and the color is going to be muted foreground. Perfect. Now I'll also just add a key over here and make it be tag index. Perfect. You see, it looks pretty good. I can hover it. It looks fine. And on a bigger screen, it also looks fine. There's just one small thing I want to make, which is make the dots that appear through the timeline. If you remember on this version that we have over here, there's the dots. And obviously, when it's the current one, it should pulsate. To do that, we're going to come here to this timeline dot that we didn't touch before, and we'll just add some styles to it. We'll start by adding a position of it. Left is going to be 0. On a medium screen, it's not going to be 0 because it's going to be in the middle. So I'm going to say a half, top 0. And I'll set it to have a width and a height of 3 so that it actually becomes a circle. I'll add the color to be primary. Now on each of them, there should be 1. And I'm going to make it rounded so it's a circle. So I'm going to do rounded full. Then I'm going to translate X to be a half so that it actually centers in the middle. I'm adding a ring around it of 4, but I'm gonna add the ring to be of color background and then a Z index of 10. Now to make it pulsate, here's what we have to do. We'll go inside of this div just like this, and we're gonna check to see if the experience.current is true. If that is, then I'll render another span that is going to be inside of it. Now this span is self-closing, so I'm gonna remove this and do this. Now what do we want to do with this span? I'm going to add a class name of position absolute inset 0 rounded full BG primary and then animate ping, which is going to start pinging. We also want to set the opacity to be 75 just so that it's not too obvious. Now it's a little bit more smoother and you can see. Perfect. That's pretty much it. Now, this section, as you can see, is the hardest out of the next ones that we're going to make. So if you want to practice the next ones without continuing the video, feel free to do so. But I'm going to show you guys how to do everything. The next section is going to be the testimonials section. In this one, because it just reuses a lot of the stuff that we've already learned so far, I'll go a little bit faster. To start off the bat, if you look over here, you'll see that for each testimonial, it's a card that appears in the middle. It has a profile image, a name, and also a description of who they are. Now, all of the images I'm using here are actually very commonly used images. I always use them in projects. They have a public URL, and it's just, I don't know if it's fake people, but they're used everywhere in different projects when you're trying to mock something. Now, you don't need to put images for people. You don't even need to put the profile images or their name, but it's good to have a testimonial so people can vouch for you. And to create this kind of thing, what I want to do first is create an array of testimonials like we did for all the other pages. Now, this is what I want you to put on that array. Each item in the array is going to have a quote, an author name, a role, and an avatar. If you don't want to put their profile images, don't put the avatar. If you want to use the same ones as I did and pretend like it's a real one, feel free to do so. I'm not in control of you, but just use the URLs that are over here. Then we're going to come down here and we'll start building this section. The first thing we need to build is the intro of the section, which we've done multiple times as well. Just make sure to change the ID to testimonials. Then we want to add a glow around it, just like this, and it should look a bit like this. Then we'll create the container like we did on the other ones as well. And now we're ready to go. For the header section, I'm not gonna show myself writing it because we've done it already 4 times, but here is what you need to put. This is the section header. This time it's gonna be centered like the project one. You're gonna apply a text center, a max width, margin X auto, and a margin bottom of 16. Then you do the same kind of manipulation we did with this pen for the first section. You uppercase it, and then on this one you use an H2 and a span to write like the different fonts for you. One minor change that I did was I used this notation of adding a empty space using this instead of just adding it over here, but you can do whatever you want. Now we go down this div and we're gonna create the testimonial carousel. This one I'll show myself doing it because it's different from what we've done. Now to create this testimonial carousel, I'll create here a div and another div, and I'm going to create the main testimonial. Now what is that? Well, differently from how we rendered lists in the past, we're not showing all of the items at the same time. Actually, we're only showing one at each time. So we just have to build a UI for that one. Now we have a list. So we're going to have to keep track of which of these testimonials in the list we're going to be showing at each time. At first, let's just show the first testimonial, which I believe is going to be this one over here. So we'll go back over here, and for the main testimonial, I want to add a div that is going to have another div. Now this div is going to actually be for the quote. Quote is an icon from Lucid React that should look like this to indicate that this is a testimonial. Then below this quote, we're going to add the actual quote. Based on how HTML works, you can add quotes by adding the block quote tag. Then in the block quote, we're going to get the list of testimonials. And for now, we're just going to render the first one and get the quote just like this. Then below this block quote, we're going to render information about the author. We're going to first show their image if applicable. If not, then just ignore it. For the image, we're going to show the source here. We're going to apply the testimonials, get the first one and show the avatar. We're going to then apply the alt. And for the alt, we're going to do something similar. We're just going to apply it just like this, but not the avatar, but rather the author name. Then below this, we're going to add a div that is going to show more information about the author. We're going to show in this div the actual name of the author again. We're going to say author, and then we're going to have another div below this that is going to show the role of that person. So I'm going to say testimonial 0 role. Perfect. Now let's add the styles for this whole carousel. We'll start by adding the top styles for the carousel, just this. We're going to set the class name to be max width for XL and a margin X of auto. Then on this div, we're going to add a position relative. Then I want to come to the main testimonial and I'll make the background be glass, have a padding of 8, and I'm going to set it to have a very rounded corner. So 3 XL. Then I want to go and make it so that in the middle screen and above, I'll make the padding be bigger. And I'm going to set the glow border so that it has that glow in the border. Now I'm also going to animate fade in and apply a delay of 200. Then in the quote icon, I'm going to set it to be completely absolute so it doesn't affect the inside of it and it appears over here. So I'll say position absolute. I'm setting it to be at the negative top 4, so it goes a little bit up, not an equal sign, so it's over here, and then a little bit more to the left. So I'll just say left 8. Then I'll set the width to be 12 and the height to be 12, and for it to be rounded full. Then a BG primary. Then I'm gonna put a display flex, items center, and justify center. Then we can come down here for the actual quote. I'll change the color because white is too strong. And then I'm going to put the width to be 6, the height to be 6, so it's a bit smaller. And then I'm also going to make it such that the color text primary foreground. Perfect. Now we come down here to the block quote, and I'm gonna add a text XL and make that be 2XL on larger screens. Make the font be medium, and we'll add a leading relaxed with a margin bottom of 8 and a padding top of 4. Perfect. Then on this div, I want to set the class name to have a display flex, item center, and a gap of 4. Then on the image, I'm going to set the class name to have a width of 14, a height of 14, then a rounded full, and an object cover with a ring of 2, and that ring be a primary color with 20% opacity. So it creates this little circle around, and because it's object cover, the image goes inside of that circle. Then on this div, we're going to set the display to flex. We're going to center the items, and we're going to put a gap of 4 in between them so they're spaced out. Now for the author, I want to set the font to be semi-bold. And on the other one, I want to set the text to be small and the text to be muted foreground. Now this is one way to show it, but if you want to show it exactly how I show it over here where it goes below, some people prefer either way, you just have to remove this at the top as well. Now we're pretty much done with rendering this, but we have to know how to switch between one testimonial to the other. So we're going to add the navigation controls for this testimonial section over here. We're going to go down 4 divs, so just over here, and this will be testimonial navigations. Then I'm going to render a div, put a button, and I'm going to add the left navigation. So I'm going to use a chevron left, which is an icon to show the left button. Then I'm going to show the dots. Now what are the dots? Well, if you go over here, it shows how many of the testimonials you have. So it's going to be a bunch of dots that we're going to render, and it will depend on the testimonials list. So I'm going to do testimonials.map, map through each of them, but it's going to be a bit different because we don't really care about the individual stuff of the testimonials. Those are rendered over here. We just care to know how many of them there are. So I'll just get the index over here. And for each testimonial, I want to render a button that is going to act as a dot. So in this button, it's going to be self-closing actually, just like this. And we're going to make it such that it represents a dot. But before we do that, I'm going to add this other button that is going to be the right. We're going to do chevron right, and it should be the right button. Okay. Let's style all of this because it's looking pretty ugly. We'll start by doing display flex, items, center, justify, center. So it's centered vertically and centered horizontally. We'll put a gap of 4 between each item and a margin top of 8. Then on this button, I'm going to add a padding of 3. I'm going to make it completely rounded. I'm going to make it be glass. And then I'm going to add a hover effect where the color becomes slightly more green when you hover it, but just a bit. Also, the color will become primary, so it becomes green, and we're going to add a transition all. Now, this is what it looks like. I can hover it and it becomes slightly green. I'm going to copy this class name and I'm going to just paste it on the chevron right as well. Then for the dots, here's where a lot of the styles come in. We're going to actually have a class name that is dynamic because if you look at how we styled this over here, when you are in the individual dot that you want to be, the style changes. Also, I don't know if you guys noticed from the demo, but you can click on the dots to move. You don't have to use the left and right, which is pretty cool. So we'll make this dynamic. We'll set all of them to have a width and a height of 2. And we're going to apply a transition all and a duration of 300. Then I'm going to insert here another item where it's going to get the index and it's going to check to see if it's equal to 0. Now, why am I doing 0? Well, it's because as of right now, we are only showing the first testimonial, but then we're going to change this to actually check to see if it's the testimonial that we want to currently be in. And then when that's true, we want to check and add a width of 8 to make it bigger and a BG primary. So you should see that it should only have one as of right now that is pretty long because it's the active one. Now, what I want to do after is on the other ones, I want to set the BG to be muted foreground with 30% opacity. So all of them should be gray, but they're all together. So we want to separate them. And also when you hover them, I want to just set the same kind of color, but it's going to be 50% instead. Now to separate them, we have to add a class name on here to set display flex, and then we can put a gap of 2 in between them. Also, I want to make it fully rounded. So I'm going to add a rounded full over here so that they actually look like what we wanted. Now we're kind of ready to be able to make it dynamic. I want to be able to click on these sections and be able to move through them. Also, I noticed as of right now that some of our buttons don't have the pointer, right? When I hover it, it doesn't change my cursor to pointer. That's actually pretty fine for me to do. I can just come here to our base layer, add a button layer, and make it such that every single time we have a cursor on a button, it should become a pointer. I don't really mind doing this for all buttons because I think that all of the buttons deserve to have a cursor to be pointed. Now, what do we want to do? Well, we want to keep track of which testimonial we want to show. And to do that kind of stuff, we need to know which testimonial is in the screen and be able to manipulate that. So we're going to be using states just like we did on our Navbar. I'm going to come over here and I'll create a state called active index. It's the state showing the active index, meaning the active testimonial. It's going to start at 0 so that it shows the first testimonial. Then I want to make two functions. The next, it's going to be the next testimonial function. And I'm also going to make the previous testimonial function. I'm going to call this prev. Now, when I call this function, all it does is it sets the active index to be equal to, and then I'm going to get the previous one. Oh, I just realized that I shouldn't call this prev. I'll call this previous, and then I'll get the previous item, and I'm just going to increase it by 1 to move it once more. And then here's the tricky part. I'm going to modulate it with the testimonial's length. Why am I doing that? Because if I move to the last item, if you look at the final result, when I'm over here, adding 1 to it is going to actually make it be out of bounds. And it's going to, the prev plus 1 at the last item is going to be equal to the total length of this. So if the list has 4 items, right? The first index will be a 0, the second one will be 1, the third one will be 2, and then the last one will be 3. But the length of this is 4, right? Now, if I'm in the first item, which is how we start, and I click the next button, it's going to call this next function. It's going to add 1 to it, and then it's going to become 1. Then it's going to become 2, and then 3. When it reaches 3, we want it to go back to 0, right? What modulo does is it gets the remainder. So what it's going to do is when we have our 3, it's going to add 1 to it, which is going to become 4. And then it's going to modulate with the length, which is 4, which there's no remainder. So it's going to become 0, which means it's going to return back to 0, and it creates this perfect loop. This is a very nifty trick, and if you're not familiar with how modulo works, I wouldn't worry that much. It's not a front-end topic, like a front-end concept is more of a programming and a math concept. So I recommend just checking out other video tutorials on it, or you definitely saw this if you did a computer science degree, or even if you didn't, just one Google search away if you didn't fully understand my explanation. But what we want to do now is copy this logic, put it over here, and do kind of the opposite. But the opposite isn't just doing -1 here. It's also adding the testimonial's length to the end of this -1. Then what we do is we go to the 2 buttons, right? The chevron left over here and the chevron right. I'm going to put the previous here, and then on the chevron right, I'm going to add it here actually, so it's easier. I'm going to call the next button. And then I'm going to switch what we show here. Instead of showing zeros for all of them, I'm going to show the active index. I'll copy this and replace every single instance of where we use the 0. It should still remain the same, but when I click on this button, you should see it should now switch. Now it's not switching this bottom thing because we haven't manipulated that yet, but we're going to do that right now. So what we need to do is replace the 0 with active index. You see that now at least it shows it, but we're not able to click on the individual buttons. To do that, we don't need to create an external function. We're just going to add an onClick and call the set active index to be the index that that specific circle is. So now I can click on that one and it will take me there, this one, and so on. So that's pretty much it for the testimonial section. It's pretty interesting. You can create this little carousel, and if you've never done this before, you can now do it on every other project that you build. Now it's time for us to build the only fully dynamic part of the website, which is this part over here. It's the contact section. On this section, we're going to be using an email provider to send emails to ourselves. And we're going to be using Email.js. It's not sponsored by Email.js. I've used them multiple times in my videos, but you can use any other email provider if you want to. Now to build that, here's what we want to do. So what we want to do is we're going to close that off and open up the contact section. Now, the first thing we want to do here in the contact section is create an array called contact info. This one will include certain things about how to get in contact with you. None of these things are true to myself. I'm obviously not going to dox myself, but put the information that you want. Now, some people don't want to put like their phone numbers out there. I used to put mine on my website until some of my subscribers back in the day started calling me, and then I was like, oh, it's better not to have it. But I recommend you guys putting it just in case like people will try to call you, like recruiters will try to call you. That's very common. And location, you don't need to put your direct address, but you can just put like the city and the state that you live in. I obviously don't live in San Francisco, but I put it over here. Now, we'll start building the section. To start things off, I'm going to paste here the section for the contact. Again, same thing as what we've done so far for the other ones, including adding a background glow that looks like this. It's just going to add that little glow that appears on the section. You can just copy and paste it. Again, just using all of the stuff that we have already used. Then I want to create the container section. I'm just going to copy and paste it as well. And inside of the container section, I'm going to add the header. Since we are at the section after the testimonials where it's centered, it should be on the left. I think I might have not rendered the contact section over here, or I did, but it's not rendering actually, because you see in the contact info array, we rendered some icons, but I forgot to import them. So we have to import them at the top over here by just saying import mail from Lucid React, then import the phone icon from Lucid as well, and the map pin icon. Now it should work when I refresh this. Perfect. Now let's go down here and let's see how it looks. So this is the title section for the contact. Now we got that stuff that we have already worked on out of the way. It's time to build some really meaningful stuff. We're going to build the contact form. We'll start by building a div and then another div inside of it that will have a form. Now for the form, there's just a couple things that we need for each from the user to actually send a message to us. We needed to have a label for the name, the email, and also whatever they want to send. So for each of those inputs, we're going to have a div here with a label representing that input. For example, the name should have that. Then we're going to have the actual input, and that should be pretty much it. Then I'll copy this, paste it here twice more. This will be for the email, and then this will be for the message. Now, what do we want to do? Well, let's start with this div over here. I'm going to add a class name here. I'm going to make this be glass, and I'll add a padding of 8. You'll see that now it looks like this. Now I'm going to make it be rounded 3XL to look like a card. I'll add a border, make that border be primary, 30 opacity, and I'm going to animate fade in with a delay of 300. Then what I want to do is on this div over here, actually, sorry, this class should be on the div below. I made a mistake in that. It should be here. And this class should be just structuring how this form looks. It should be a display of grid, and in a large screen, it should have 2 columns. So we're going to do grid calls 2. Then a gap of 12. We're going to max the width at 5XL and a margin X of auto. Then for the actual form, we're just going to put a space in between each inputs because they're all cluttered together. We'll put a space in the Y direction of 6. Then on each label, we have to pass in an HTML form. This is a value that is corresponding to what we passed in here as the ID for this input. So I'm going to make it be name, and then on this, I'll make it be name as well. Then on the label, I'll make it be display block, text, small, font, medium, and margin bottom of 2. Then I'll copy this and I'll paste it on this label and on this one too. Now I'll change them. For the email, I'll call this email, and for this one, I'll call it message. And then for the input, here's what we have to do. We have to add a bunch of stuff related to it. Like for example, what is the type? I'm going to make it be text. And also the styling, we want to make it such that the input has the full width of the card. It has a padding X of 4, a padding Y of 3. And then I want to make it have a background of surface. Then inside of it, I'm also making it have a rounded corner. I'm going to add a border to it with the color border. Then I'm going to, when you focus on it, I want to add a border to make it be green. So while I'm writing on it and I focus, it becomes green. But there's a problem because when I focus on it, you see that there's this weird ring around it that comes with every input. So I'll actually make it such that when I focus on it, the ring is only one size and the color of it is primary as well. So you see now it shouldn't look like that. But to remove that, we just need to remove the outline. So I'll say outline is equal to none. And now it looks like exactly how I want. I'll also add a transition all so that it's a lot smoother. I'm going to copy this and I'm going to paste it on the email input as well. Now for this one, I'm going to paste it in here as well, but there's a major difference for the last one because the type that we have here for the first one is type text. The second one is going to be type email, but it still looks like an input. But this last one over here is actually not an input. This should be a text area. And on the text area, the only change that we need to make is I don't want to allow it to resize. See how it allows us to resize? I want to remove that possibility. So I'm going to make it be resize none. And then when we refresh this, it should be, yeah, I can't do that anymore. Perfect. Now I'm going to come up here and I want to set some requirements to our inputs. For example, each input is going to be required and they're going to have a placeholder. On the name one is going to be your name. I'm going to copy this and I'm going to add it over here. This one will be your email. And then on this one, it's going to be just your message, just like this. Now, did we not add it to the email? I realized I added to the complete wrong place. It should go in the input itself. Now, on the email one, actually, I'm going to format it so it should look like an email to let them know, just like this, and this should be fine. Now, for the text area, I want to make it a bit bigger, and we can do that by setting the specific max amount of rows to be 5. Now, we have a form ready, but we need to have a button at the bottom to submit the form. So below this div, I'm going to use our button class that we created in the beginning, and we're going to create a button that is going to say send message, and it's going to have a send icon as well, which we can import from Lucid React. Now we have to import that button component. So I'll say import button from, and then I'll import @/components/button. Pretty sure that's how we called it, right? Yeah. And now we should have that button at the bottom, send a message. But let's make a small change to this button just because we allow ourselves to customize this button more by passing a class name. And what I want to do is I want to set the width to full. You see, it will actually make it entirely full width of the contact form. I also want to make this button be of type submit. And then I want to make the size be large. Now, one thing you might have noticed is that when we pass this type submit, how will this work? Because when we look at the component we created here for the button, it doesn't accept a type as a prop, but that's fine. What we can do is situations like this, we can just pass along every prop that we pass here. So to do that, we can accept all of the props by destructuring them over here like this, and then just passing them back into the button when we call it. And then whatever I pass in as a prop that isn't one of the specified types will just be repassed down to that button, including this type. And now it's time for us to actually make such that this form can submit the information. To do that, we're going to create a state that is going to keep track of the form data. So we're going to create here a useState, and the form will have the following data. It's going to be an object with a name, which is a string, an email, which is a string, and a message, which is also a string. I'm going to call this state form data and the set form data function. Then I want to create a function that when called is going to submit this form. So I'll create a handle submit function. It's going to be async because just to send an email, it's an async operation, and it will take in the form event. If you've ever submitted a form in an HTML page before, you know that it refreshes the page, but we don't want that to happen. We are going to prevent default, which prevents the default behavior of refreshing the page. Now, how do we get to keep track of what the user is typing on this form and set it to this form data state? Well, what we do is we go to each input and we're going to add the following piece of code. For each input, we want to add an on change to it, where whenever there's a change to the input, we're going to call the set form data function. We keep all of it the same. So the rest of the inputs that aren't being touched keep the same, but this specific input that we are changing here, which in this case is the name, we're going to set that value equal to whatever the user is typing on the inputs. We also added a value here just to make it such that they are both in sync. And we do the same thing for all of the other inputs. For the input for the email, we do the same thing, but we just change this to say email. And then we change this to say email. And then on this one, we do the exact same thing, but we change this to say message and this to say message. Now we're pretty much ready to be able to submit this form as an email. But to do that, like I said, we have to set up an account on this other external service called Email.js. Now this is Email.js, again, not sponsored. So if you don't want to create an account, You don't have to do it. I'm going to log into an account I have. I'm going to click here, sign in. And when you create your account, you're going to come here. It's completely free. I want you guys to do the following. I want you guys to click add new service, choose the personal service that you have. So to make it free, you're only going to be receiving emails on an account that you connect. So connect your own account, right? So your email, your Gmail, your, I don't know, Outlook, whatever you have. And that's the email you're going to be receiving the contact messages from. If I choose Gmail, you click this, you click connect account, and it's going to connect to your Gmail account. And it allows up to 500 emails per day, I believe, on the free plan. After that, you're going to get a service ID. I'm just going to use this one that I created before creating this video. I'm going to copy this and I'm going to come back to our code, and we need to save that information somewhere, but we want to save it in a environment variables file, a .env file, because it's going to make it such that we don't have to publish this information to GitHub when we push our code. So I'm creating here a .env file, and I'm going to create an environment variable in this project. To create an environment variable in Vite, you have to start the name of it with Vite underscore, and then write the name of the variable you want to create. For example, we're going to keep track of the service ID. So I'm going to call it Vite email.js underscore service ID and set it equal to this. I'll do the same thing 2 more times, and we're going to create 2 more variables. Now we're going to create the template ID, which I'll show you guys how to actually make that. And we're going to create the public key, which I'll show you how to get that as well. So the public key is your public API key. You're going to go to account, and then right over here, you see you have access to the public key. You get that key, and then you just put it over here. Now for the template ID, here's what you have to do. You go to email templates after you have already created your service. You will see nothing. This is what I created for the demo, but you click on create new template. You're going to choose contact us, click on create template. Then you'll have a simple template email that you might want to use. Now the template ID is part of the settings over here. You're going to copy that, come back to our code and paste it over here. Now, before we continue, we want to make the email look a little bit better. Now, to do that, you can use their edit content over here, and they have 2 options. Either you write HTML to make the email look better, or you use their design editor. I hate using design editors because I don't know how to use it. Every website makes it different, but HTML is universal, so I made it in HTML. Now, if you want to use the same one that I used, just copy and paste. It's going to be there in the description. Now, if you want to use the same one, just copy. It's going to be in the README in the description, and you should have an email format that looks like this. Now, this I think looks fine. You click on apply changes, and this is the kind of email that you're going to get. You see that there are some variables here, and they all depend on what we actually send from the code that we are sending from ourselves. Now, all of the emails are going to be sent to the email that you connected. I'm using this fake email over here called PedroTech resumes. I've used it multiple times on videos. Don't send emails to there because I'm never going to look at it. And it's just the email that I use for testing. Now I'm going to click on save, and the email template has been added successfully. Now we can get out of email.js and we can come back to our code. I'm going to make it look in mobile. I'm going to resize this to mobile again. And we can come back here to our context.jsx. And the first thing I want to do is on our form here, I want to add an on submit and call the handle submit function when that happens. Now, to send an email using email.js, we have to install the email.js package. To do that, you're going to run npm i email.js/browser and then press enter. It's going to install that package. Then you're going to come down here to the handle submit, and we want to try sending the email and catch any errors that might happen. We'll start with the try case. Now, while we send the email, we want to keep track of some statuses of how the email sending functionality is working. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create 2 more states. One is going to be an is loading, and the other one is going to be a submit status. Now, what are they? The is loading is while I send the message, when I click on this button to send a message, while it's sending the email, I want this to show a different UI while it's loading, meaning it's sending the email. And the submit status will let us know if it was successful or if there was an error. We're just going to keep track of that in case we want to show to the user, because the worst thing that can happen is you're saying that you're good at writing or at making websites, and then a recruiter tries to send an email to you and you're not handling errors correctly, and then they figure out that you're not as good of a developer. So you want to make sure to let them know by handling every single state that can happen in your website. So right off the bat, when we start submitting the form, I want to reset the submit status in case this is the second time we're sending an email and there was an error in the first time. And also I'm going to set is loading to true. Why? Because I'm going to set is loading to true. Inside of this try case over here, we're going to try some asynchronous behavior. And when that's done, we're going to add a finally clause over here where I'm going to set is loading to false. So no matter if it's an error or it was successful, I'm going to set it to false. Now in this try case, we want to get the environment variables that we created over here. To get environment variables from your .env file in Vite, you basically import them, say import.meta.env, and then write the name of the environment variable. I imported all three of them and I set them to their respective variables. Then we want to make sure to check to see if we got them correctly, because maybe we didn't set it. In case we didn't, I just throw this error. This should never go to production. Like this should never happen in production, because in production, we're going to set our environment variables, but we see over here that we check it before we actually continue. And then the next thing we want to do is we want to send the email. To send the email, I'm going to call the email.js package. Now that I can import over here, I'm going to import email.js from @email.js/browser. And what I want to do with this email.js package is I want to call the send function. Now the send function requires us to pass four things. The first one is going to be the service ID, and we already have that from our environment variables. The second one is the template ID. So what is the template of the email you want to send? The third one is going to be an object with the information that we're sending through that email. And the final one is going to be a public key that we have for our account. Now, what we send over here is the actual data. So what I'm going to put is I want to send the name, the email, and also the message. Remember, those are all variables that we defined in our template. If I go to our email.js template over here, I think it's this one. You'll see that it includes over here the name, the message, and also the email, right? So what I want to do is I want to pass in as the name, the form data.name. As the email, I'll do the same thing, but .email. And for the message, I'll do the same thing, but .message. Then if this was successful, I'm going to set the submit status to be a success and a little message just to let the user know that everything was correct. If it was also successful, we want to reset the form data so that the inputs are clear. Finally, in case there's an error, I want to console log that error so that we can see it internally as the developers, and also set the error message to be displayed in the screen. Now to handle the loading state and all of that, we're going to come down here, and for the button, the submit button, I'm going to disable this button if the form is currently loading, meaning if I'm submitting the form, the user can just keep sending emails and spamming me. That's a great way to prevent spam. Then I'm also going to replace what we show depending on if the user is submitting the form or not. So hang on for a second. I'm going to check here. If is loading is true, then I want to render a different UI. If it's false, I want to render what I already have. Now, what UI do I want to render while it's true? Well, I want to render a message saying sending, and I don't want to show any icons. Also, let me just make this icon a bit smaller because I realize it's a bit big over there. I'll make it width of 5 and a height of 5. Now, to show the error message, I'm just going to paste it over here because it's a bit of the same of what we've done so far as well. The only thing we need to do is add the check circle and alert circle as icons over here. So we'll also add the alert circle. Now, what this is going to do is in case the submit status is true and it's a success. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to remove this check so you guys can see what happens in case it's true. Then we see and then I'll make this be success. So what happens is if this is success and this is success, I know this looks really weird, we see a success message over here. If it's not, if it's an error, we're going to see it red and we're going to see this look like an error message, and it only shows if the submit status gets updated. Now it's time for us to try sending a message. I'm going to open up my email and we'll see if we do receive it. If we don't, I'll address any errors. Okay, I have the email opened over there, and I'm going to also inspect element over here so we can see if we console log anything. I'm going to send an email. I'm going to pretend I'm a recruiter called Jack Rader from jack@rader.com and say, hello, we are interested in hiring you. I'm going to click send message. It changes to that state, and then it says message sent successfully. So it seems like everything was great. The only way to check is if I actually got that email. And guess what? I did get that email. I got that email and it was sent from another account that I registered, not this account specifically, but it looks fine. It looks great. I actually got the correct information from what we'd set and the actual message. So the email contact form is working perfectly. Now, you might be noticing that this is a bit out of place, and that's because I also added this part over here that talks about your actual contact information. And that's why we even put this list at the top. Now, to do that, it's pretty simple. It's a lot of what we've done so far, so I'm also going to just copy and paste it. If you don't like that I'm copy and pasting this end of the video, you can criticize me in the description, but I feel like it's better to just go a bit faster because I already spent a lot of time explaining the rest of this to you guys. Now, below this div over here, we're adding the contact info. Now, for the contact info, I'm gonna paste the following. This is how it's gonna look. You're going to render a title for the section. You're going to loop through the contact info list that we created, and you're just going to render a little tag for each of them. Now, this is how it's going to look. You map through each of them, render it, show the icon, show the label, and at the bottom, we just added a very simple availability card that blinks by using the animate pulse that we have used as well previously in this tutorial. And that's pretty much it. Now, the final thing that I want to do is I want to add a footer at the bottom. Now, for the footer, I'm going to create here a component, and it's going to be in the layout. It's going to be called footer.jsx. Then if you want to have my footer, just copy and paste this code, and it's going to just be a representation of the Navbar at the bottom with the current year and all of the social links that we have. It should look a bit like, oh, actually I didn't call it. So we'll come here to our app.jsx, and I'm going to call it right below the main tag, and I'll call the footer, and it should look like this. So feel free to use the same kind of footer if you want to. It's basically a redone of the navbar, and that's pretty much it. Now we just have to deploy this website so that everyone can access it no matter where they are. Now it's time for us to deploy our application so that our recruiters can see our website being live. Now to do that, we're going to be using two free services, GitHub and Vercel. GitHub is going to store our code and Vercel is going to host it. Now, in order for us to get this to work, we need to first push our code to a GitHub repository. So I'm going to create a new repository. I'm going to call it React Tailwind Personal Portfolio, and I'll create this repository. This is going to be the repository that you guys see when you access my code. Then we have an issue because you know this .env file? This is not a file that we want to push to the public. Why? Because it has all of our API keys for email.js, and we don't want it to be available for everyone browsing our GitHub account. So what I want to do is I want to just simply make this file be a local file by adding a .env.local. This on top of also coming here and maybe making all env variations like .env.local, anything, it will make it such that whenever we push this code to GitHub, it's going to ignore the env file that we have here. Then I want to push this code. So to push it, I'm going to copy all of this command and I'm going to initialize a new repository in our project. You see that the .env.local is kind of hidden. It's gray, and that's because it is not going to be sent when we push this code. Then I'm going to run git add dot, and I'm going to paste all of the commands that we copied from there. This should paste and push all of our code. And if we look right here, you see that we have our entire code, but it doesn't include the .env.local file. Now we can go ahead and create a Vercel account. I highly recommend that you create an account with GitHub by using your GitHub account so that both of them are already connected. Now, when you get to Vercel, you're going to come here to projects and then overview and click on add new project. Then what I need you to do is you need you to find the repository that we just created. We created here the React Tailwind personal portfolio, and that's the one that I want to choose. I'm going to click on import, and you see it automatically detects that this is a Vite project. Now the important part is that we need to set on our environment variables. That's why we removed the environment variables from being pushed for GitHub, because we're going to actually add them in the backend here while deploying it to Vercel. We're going to copy this entire list. You can just copy it like this and paste it here, and Vercel will recognize what they are. Then we're going to click deploy, and it's going to start deploying the app. Now, if there's any issues while it's building, I'll let you guys know and I'll show you guys how to fix it. Once in a while, I do see failures, like it's saying here, failed to load data. We'll see what this is. However, if everything is fine, like it seems like it was, our website should be deployed. Now, where is it deployed? Well, it's deployed to this public URL that is the name of our repository on GitHub, and then the Vercel.app. You can access this website if you want to by just clicking the link in the description. Now we have our website fully working. And if you want to change the URL, maybe put your own domain, you'll do all of that in Vercel. The great thing about Vercel as well is you can check a bunch of stuff here, like analytics and so on. But this video is not sponsored by Vercel. I'm not going to go into high details on what you can do there, just because also most of them are in the paid plan. So this is basically it. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a like down below and comment what you want to see next. If you want to learn more React, check out my ReactJS Ultra course for beginners. It is the most complete React course out there. I worked a whole year to make this course happen, and I keep updating it every time there's a new change, a new bug with React, a new update, whatever it is, I'll update the course. So thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like and comment what you want to see next, and I see you guys next time.